Okay, welcome everybody to the, I have to check my computer, the July meeting of the Narberth Planning Commission. Thank you all for coming to the big room tonight. Because we are all masked tonight, we will do our best, everybody please, to speak, use your outside voice when you're speaking so everyone can hear you. Our guests, I'd encourage you, if you are, if you consider moving up, so you might be able to hear better. That might help. Tonight, we have a busy agenda. We have a tentative sketch plan for 146 Marion Avenue. We will have the further discussion about the subdivision and land development ordinance revisions. We have 2 new zoning amendments to discuss. So we should get down to business. Let the minutes note that we started at about 7:08 p.m., that all 7 planning commission members are in attendance, that Chloe Moore is here on behalf of the Montgomery County Planning Commission, Eric Johnson is here as borough engineer, and we have Kevin Walsh as building official, and Michelle Caro behind as borough staff. We have 3 members of the public attending via Zoom and 5 members of the public attending in the room here. That includes 5 people, or 6. Is Christopher Schrack, is he part of your team? Or is he a member of the public? Do you know Christopher Schrack? Okay, so we have 5 members of applicant here to discuss the project. So we'll begin with a chair's update, which will simply consist of the update that we are continuing to talk with the applicant with 714 Montgomery Avenue about revising their tentative sketch plan to address some of the concerns that were raised by the Planning Commission at its meeting, I believe, in May. And we'll look forward to receiving a revised submission sometime in the future. But they are considering our comments and granting extensions on the time so that they can consider how to address the concerns that we raised. That is the only matter I have for Chair's update. So we will move to review of the June minutes. Thank you, Adam, for presenting us with the minutes. Did everybody receive the minutes and have a chance to review them? Who's on speed read right now? You on speed read?
Couldn't hear you.
Does anybody have any comments or questions, clarifications, corrections about the minutes? Okay, may I entertain a motion then to approve the minutes as submitted by Adam? Jim moves, and is that a second time? Just like if it were an option, that's your secret signal, right? Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion about the June minutes? Okay, all in favor of approving the June minutes as submitted? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so I will post those minutes as soon as I can. Thank you, Adam, for pulling those together. We will move to our first agenda item tonight, which is land use and subdivision applications. We have one to discuss tonight, which is 146 Marion Avenue, tentative sketch plan. I will give, for the public, a little bit of background on this, and then I will ask the applicant to present their application. As usual, Borough Planning Commissioners will be able to ask questions. We'll accept public comment on this application during this agenda item. And then planning commissioners will further discussion, and then hopefully my goal is that we can frame a recommendation for our council this evening. This application is for essentially the subdivision of one property into 5 lots. On one of those lots, it is a property which is in the historic district, and it's really the first application that we are seeing that is making use of the recently approved historic district zoning overlay. So this is an application that would result in the preservation of the existing building at 146 Marion Avenue, and it would also result in infill of new houses on the lot. I'd like to remind the public that this matter has been before the Planning Commission many times, and there actually is another application for this property on the record, which was made before the Historic District Overlay was created and before the Historic District Overlay Zoning Ordinance. Two pieces of legislation were passed. And that proposal, which I believe is, if I'm correct, has received tentative approval, is to demolish the house and to create 2 pairs of twin houses on that lot. And that is essentially received zoning approval, that application. So it's important for the members of the public to understand that this is a different application, but the applicant already has an approved application that they can move forward through the process with for a different development on this site. And I will just say that we're grateful that the applicant has expressed an interest in bringing forward another application that considers some of the concerns the Planning Commission and Council raised when that first application was being discussed. So it's important to understand that sequence of events. So with that, I will ask the members, the people here who are here to speak on behalf and present this application, to introduce themselves, and then to walk us through this proposal. I will ask Michelle, do you have access to these files? Can you show them on the screen while the applicant is showing them to us in the room so that the public at home can see them?
Sure, and if you need me to change pages, just let me know.
Okay, so why don't you call that material, would you mind if she called that material up now? Or would you prefer to speak first?
I'll do it. Are masks
yes.
required?
Yeah. Yes, so I'm sorry to say, but that's as far as possible. So please, so Michelle, just hold on a second. We'll let you know when to bring those images up. So I'll recognize the team. Please introduce yourself and your colleagues who are here tonight. And then we're happy to hear your presentation.
Where would you like me to stand?
Wherever you can be heard. We're playing that by ear.
Okay. And I'll talk loud. I got the approval. So my name is Summer Knight. I am the owner and resident of 146 Marion. We have lived there for over a decade now. And I really appreciate your remarks because we have actually been on this, when I purchased the property, what I appreciated about it is that I could actually add additional structures on there, thinking about the fact that it was such a pleasure to raise my own family and that there was the capability to have that type of legacy. We have been on this journey since October of 2019, was the first time we actually reached out to the Planning Commission officially, and actually had some other conversations with the borough prior to that to get a better understanding. And I wanted to share our appreciation for the team. You mentioned that we already have an approved tentative sketch in, and that this group worked together to really consider the community, consider diversity, and being able to bring homes that are affordable for other families into the area. And we spent quite some time going through and brainstorming different options and to see where we could be flexible. So I'm going to turn it over to the team, but want to share the appreciation to this group, and also recognize that all of us are anxious of change, and I appreciate that, and hopefully we can bring us all together as we go through this process. So thank you.
Thank you.
Fred.
Thank you, Summer. I will be brief as well, and I want to extend also our whole team's appreciation for the cooperation that we've received from you from the time of initial approval of an earlier tentative sketch plan, which Chris Yon, our civil engineer who is here tonight, will just show you to kind of remind you where we had started this conversation about this particular plan. And when we received approval of that tentative sketch plan, one of the conditions that was attached was that we would take a look at the massing and see whether we could optimize the mass and scale and reduce it. So I want to be fair to that plan when he shows it to you, that was one of the conditions that you had imposed and we had accepted also. But the reality remained on that plan. The existing home was to be demolished, and we were to have two larger twins on both Marion and Rockland of similar size. And I think you had looked at it then and said, in your view, that's not Norbert, that's not what we were attempting to achieve with our new ordinance, our form-based ordinance, that we had in mind a massing and scale that was different, and that you would take a look at enacting an ordinance that would provide a reasonable development alternative in this particular case, but allow for in your view, I think, and I think at this point in ours, an improved product and something that was more in keeping with Narberth and this area of Narberth, both on Marion and on Rockland. As part of this process, I think you had come up with the concept of allowing an opportunity for some smaller house, some cottage house, that would be reduced square footage and hence a reduced size for those units, and provide something that would be a plus from the scale point of view, but also from the livability and Narberth point of view. It would provide an alternative to a future Narberth resident or a present resident who wanted to downsize a little bit, to move into a smaller housing type. It would provide a greater variety of housing. And I think that when you were working on the ordinance with Montgomery County Planning Commission, that's one of the things that you were really looking hard to achieve, and I believe did achieve that. And I think that our plan is really aimed at doing that. So that's where we started and where I think we are in terms of the plan design. But the other important component of this is the architecture. And we are working on that architecture, have been working on it. Jack Burns, who is our architect, is here this evening and has presented some what I'll call preliminary drawings to create the vision for what the units here would be. We're at tentative sketch phase, and there's certain elements of the code that are relevant now at tentative sketch, and other issues that we will be getting into in greater detail at the preliminary plan phase. So our hope this evening is that we would obtain a favorable recommendation from you with respect to this plan, which would allow us also to present an application for a special exception to the zoning hearing board in a couple of weeks, and then the following evening seek tentative sketch approval from Borough Council. So that's what we're hoping to achieve this month. As Summer has explained to you, we have been at it a long time, and you've been at it a long time too, as it relates to the not only this property, but the ordinance amendments that enable the plan that we're presenting tonight. So with that introduction, I'd like to call on Chris Yon to explain to you the main aspects of the tentative sketch plan and how we believe that we have addressed the applicable ordinance requirements. And Chris, I can help you hold this. We did not bring an easel. Did you want to? Okay. Did you want to bring it a little closer?
No, we haven't.
Would this be a good time to bring the drawings up on the screen?
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Would this be a good time to bring the drawings up on the screen?
Sure.
I mean, on the Zoom.
That would be easier.
Yeah. Michelle, could you this would be a good time.
You'll be able to see it, you just speak to the plan then.
Okay, I think before we look at the new plan, we did want to show, the approved tentative sketch plan of the two twin buildings, just so we can get a comparison of where we were and where we are. And so, then, as Fred said, there's a new twin on Marion Avenue, a new twin on Rockland, and basically span from setback to setback lines was all building. And so the feedback at that time was that those buildings weren't in scale because of the facade area requirements. We had kind of a smaller area on the first floor and then a first floor and a second floor that were set back further. And so just wanted to look at that quickly. This is the new plan that Michelle has up on the screen. And so you can see right from the start the difference is on Rockland, there's two buildings with a clear separation between the two. Those are cottages. During the infill ordinance, while that was in progress, there were conversations about whether it was appropriate to have 1,800 square feet or 2,000 square feet per cottage. As it turned out, we are somewhere in the low 1,700 range for each of these. They have an attached garage that you access from Rockland Avenue. There are no parking credits for Rockland Avenue, so they would each have an attached garage. That does require special exception approval, so we have to go to the zoning hearing board for that. For Marion Avenue side, the existing home is, if you're just looking at the plan view, is in the top right, or currently is the top right. And so what you see in here is in the top left because the proposal is to move it. And we didn't take that lightly. There were, as Summer said, we've gone through many, many iterations of how many cottages, twins, where should be the existing home, and someone said, well, what if we moved it? Because the existing home does have some limitations as it is now. And so by moving it, one of the things we could do is get a nicer basement, which I think people would be interested in. And so what you see there is the relocated home in the upper left and a twin building on the right. Again, much different from the approved plan where there's a clear separation between the two, and so we have two different buildings that can really act on their own. In addition, the old plan, those twins were permitted up to 35 feet in height. The new code for cottages and twins, in order to be on a smaller lot, the maximum height is 25 feet, and so both cottages and twins are just under that 25-foot height requirement. The Marion Avenue does have parking credits, and so each one of those new units receives it. Well, the twins receive one each, and I believe the single could have two, although it only needs one in this zoning district. So that's really the bulk of the plan. We do show stormwater management systems between the buildings and the street. We show some new street trees, although really all of that is part of the preliminary plan stage. You can see there's a whole block of calculations on the right, which are the new borough way of doing the average grade calculation, where you calculate around the property line to get the average grade. There are also the first floor elevation calculations, where you have to determine based on where the front facade is, what the average is, and then your proposed has to be between 2 and 6 feet. And then on the left-hand side are some impervious coverage calculations, and then just a full zoning chart to show all the bulk zoning. Going back to both the old plan and new plan, you're permitted to have 60% impervious coverage. The old plan was a little more than 55%. This new plan is about 52%. Just having that space between the buildings is what is a big part of knocking the impervious down a little bit, and that also gives a little more impervious available for some of that outdoor space in the rear. So that's a quick overview. Just in terms of process, we submitted this about a month and a half ago, I believe, or a little more than a month ago. We did receive review letters from the zoning officer, the attachment, the borough engineer, and also the county planning commission. They're all essentially will comply letters, and I'd be happy to go over any specific comments if you'd like. I will note that the first letter that we received from the zoning officer, because this has to go in for a special exception, the borough would prefer to have a clean letter from the zoning officer to really confirm that the only zoning relief you're asking for, or that's all that you need. And so we had a letter that I believe had 7 comments. We received that on Friday before July 4th weekend. We resubmitted on Tuesday after the 4th, addressing those comments. And so now you'll see there's only 2 comments left in the zoning officer's letter. The first one says that we need the special exception, which we have scheduled for July 20th. And the second one are some requirements that we need to do during the preliminary plan stage. So that's essentially it. I'm happy to answer, I went over that fairly quickly. I'm happy to answer any questions about the process, the plan, the review letters. Or if you'd like, we can move on to Jack and he could do the presentation of the architecture and then kind of come back to questions.
I'll ask if any planning commissioners have any questions right now about compliance with the, about the zoning fact features of this proposal, or the response that the applicant has offered to the borough engineer and the zoning officer. Any questions?
I guess I have one question about the garage. And I don't know who wants to answer, but it's very narrow, and I'm wondering, is that something that you want to have, or what's the reason for the garage?
The garage, it's an amenity for the home.
Because it's very narrow,
It is an narrow garage, yes.
and I just wonder if people are really going to use it.
I'm sorry?
I wonder if anyone's really going to use it.
Well, I'd imagine they would, yeah.
I mean, the alternative would be just to have parking on grade without any covering.
Which I believe the driveway accounts for.
I mean, would they still need to go in front of the zoning hearing board if there was no garage?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I believe that it's the amenity the owner would like to have provided for the house.
I think they would have to go to the zoning hearing board to officially have side yard parking out in the open.
And that's just for, they only need one car parking?
Yeah, only one.
Okay.
I would agree with that. I'd agree with what Mr. Spear said about
You have to go.
the old plan separated the lots a little differently, where, as you can see here, the existing house is a little deeper than the twins or the cottages shown on Rockland. And so that's forcing that property line back a little bit, whereas on the old twin plan, it was kind of the opposite. And so we had a parking space in the third lot layer. In this case, the third lot layer is only 15 feet deep. So we would need variance to be on the side.
And did you consider a shared driveway to minimize the amount of asphalt?
We did. The problem is with the 7-foot separation between the, 14-foot separation between the garages and the short distance from the curb to the driveway, you'd basically immediately be pulling out. And so it didn't really make the front that much narrower, because you immediately have to get out to be able to turn into each lot. And then with the topography on this lot, it made it a little difficult with the elevation change between the garages.
Did you follow that, right?
No. No, I'm assuming that you studied it for those reasons. You did not change.
I think, like Chris, would it be accurate to say that you found that the lot is not very deep, and so the driveway would have to kind of be wide enough for 2 cars almost from the get-go? Is that what you were trying to say?
Correct, and I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just when we did it, it didn't seem like you weren't getting much common area in the front before you were immediately spreading out. And so that common area needed to be big enough to make the turns on both sides.
I'm curious, the 10-foot garage does seem, I mean, what is a standard garage size? What would you really want to have as a garage there?
Typically, low 20s would be ideal for depth.
I'm sorry, for width?
For width, between the two, like 10 feet or so would be ideal. Not ideal, but
12, 14.
Depends on whether you want to open the door.
Yeah, I had a 10-foot garage, however, then we didn't use it.
Well, what's going to happen here is Owners are gonna fill the garage with stuff, which is what 95% of Americans do with their garages,
Especially a narrow one, yeah.
whether it's narrow or not. And they're gonna park in front of the garage. That's what I would
Well, is
do.
there an access from the garage into the house?
There is not, it's an exterior.
Yeah.
There's a significant change between grade between the garage and the home.
Yeah,
I mean,
There'd be a lot of steps in between.
you can get a pool table in there if you use a short cube.
Try to shoot from the end, not the side. Okay, are there any other questions at this point? I will ask, Kevin, welcome. I see you're online and you've turned your camera on, which means maybe you'd like to speak. I don't know, but do either you or Eric, Kevin or Eric, do you have any comments about the applicant's responses to your review letters?
Kevin, do you have anything before I?
Kevin,
No, again, I mean, I sent a review letter out on Friday the 1st, and they had already resubmitted the plans, I think, on Tuesday the 5th, and I reissued a letter. So obviously everything's compliant on my end, rather except for the special exception.
And that one feature that needs to be submitted at preliminary. So then, okay, so you don't have any further questions about it? Eric,
I'm
do you have
good.
any further questions?
I guess the only question I had, and maybe for discussion, is the only significant comment in my letter has to do with the grade across the various lots. So I just, maybe if you have submitted, what's the proposed connection between all the properties, if you thought that through a little bit. And then while you're at it, I see we're proposing to relocate the house across that frontage. Just for the record, what is the reasoning for moving it all the way over there as opposed to shifting it? I think I know the answer, but just shifting it a few feet in its current location. I assume that's to do with the foundation construction.
I've been working back and forth with the house moving folks for a couple weeks now,
Yeah.
a little more than that actually. And we need someplace for it to land.
So you have to
Need
build
someplace
the
for it to land
foundation
quickly, because
right.
the idea, so you build a whole new other foundation waiting for it.
Instead of suspending the house over a new foundation.
Correct.
That's what I figured. So maybe it's really my biggest question is the grade between the lots.
Grade-wise, at this part in the process, we don't go into the full grade, but we have thought about it with our first 4 elevations. We had some kind of ideal elevations, and then we had worked through building height. We had to adjust a little bit. So I do know that at the rear right corner, or bottom right-hand corner of lot 3 of that twin, we will need a retaining wall there. We were thinking that likely that side of the building would retain some earth, instead of having a typical foundation wall and then floor joists on that. We would likely have the foundation wall come up higher, or maybe even above first floor for a little while, so that we could retain some of that grade and keep the grade kind of as is. And then the retaining wall would likely extend down the back of that building and retain some earth for that patio. That was the main one that we knew needed some.
You said lot 3.
Yes, the twin on the plan at the top right.
Okay, so working using the foundation and or the landscaping of the patio to help make your transitions there. Sure. Okay.
It's a fairly common detail we use it regularly.
Right, yeah, okay.
Chris,
Go ahead.
sorry, Eric. Chris, have you looked into the height of the wall that you're proposing to make sure you don't need zoning relief for the height of the wall?
No, I mean, right now, we could also do some grading to help solve it. We're thinking that the wall is likely what we're going to do, but we would not be asking for any zoning approval for the wall. We would be meeting with it. We typically like to keep walls under 4 feet high. That way we don't need calculations and we don't get into height issues. But it would, Kevin, be inside the building envelope as well. It would not, the way we're envisioning it, would not be sticking out into the side yard setback.
That's really the only comment I wanted to raise.
Okay. So no other questions about this aspect of the application, then please go ahead and show us the architectural.
Sure. Did you want to go through building by building, building 1, building 2? This will start
I'm not sure what other option there is. I'm trying to figure this out. What am I trying to say?
You can show these on this one too.
Michelle, do you have these,
Yes,
oh, okay.
She's looking at it.
Ask her to go to page. Can you show the facades, Michelle, please?
I think that's page 3.
The TW200 is the facades.
There we go.
This is a view of the facades, so this would be along Marion Avenue right here. It's a twin building, so there's a party line down, there's a party wall down the middle. What we're looking at is the eve of a gable roof that's facing the side yard. What that enables us to do is to keep the facade within the area calculations that we're looking for the overall block.
And Jack, not to interrupt you, but just so that those who may be looking at the screen, you're talking about the elevation in the upper left corner of what is on this plan, is that correct?
Correct, yes, thank you. For now, yeah. Here we have the calculations of the glazing and openings. Here we have the calculations of the facade, and we're in compliance with everything we need for that. As you come around the side, this is the typical side elevation of the building, so it would be this side and this side as well, both have the same elevation, just mirrored.
Be the lower right.
And then, sorry, yes, the lower
Yeah, so,
right.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but for the folks at home who are looking at this, could you reference what drawing you're showing?
Certainly.
Thank you.
So for TW200, which is in the bottom right, is the side elevations of the homes. And we can see the protruding front porch. We go to 2 stories back at the line. Gable roof coming up at an acceptable pitch. And then moving back with glazing, going back along the facade. In the top right corner of this sheet, we have the rear facade of the building. Again, the party wall down the middle. We have a bay window on the left at the second floor, and then first, second, third floor there. The elevations for the cottages at the rear on Rockland Avenue. I have a typical set of drawings for both. So starting at the bottom left, we have the front elevations of each of these buildings with the front porch, fenestration into the garage, there's a stairwell there. 2 stories at the front, and then the third story, there isn't a third story back here, but there's a decorative window up in the gable that will be opening up into attic space. The top left of the sheet shows a side elevation from the garage, shows the setback. Garage at the first floor, second floor is a bedroom, and then the porch is protruding off the front again. In the top right, we have the rear elevation, which is a similar look and feel to the front, but mirrored about. Access to the grade out here, some windows, kitchen windows. And in the bottom right, we have the 4th elevation of these, which is kind of just a typical facade with windows in it. In the middle, we have the fenestration calculations and the facade area calculations listed. And again, these are in compliance with the current code we've been working with. This is the existing elevations of the existing home. I don't know that there's much to address on this here, the following sheet. Additionally, we have schematic basement floor plan on CT 100. We're looking at the cottage. So a schematic basement layout on the left. Typical, 4 square with an entry hall, powder room, basement stair access, kitchen, dining, living room on the first floor. Area-wise, it's not a very large building. Nice little cottage layout. The garage is to the right there. As we move up to the second floor, there's a master bedroom, a bedroom over the garage, and a bedroom in the back corner. The 2 upstairs bedrooms share a hall bath, laundry area up there, and then there's a master bath, an ensuite master bath there. And here's a diagram of the room on the right. The TW100 is one side of a twin. So on the left-hand side, we've got a blocked out basement, all below grade. To the right-hand side of TW100 is the first floor plan of these. We have entry into a living room, circulate through a dining room, into a largish kitchen at the rear, which connects to the backyard. Then through there, we have access to the basement and also some back of the house type stuff. There, powder, etc. And as we continue up to the second floor, you arrive in a stair hall upstairs, bedroom at the front with an associated ensuite bath, master bedroom at the rear, closets and an ensuite bath for them, and a laundry room and another stair which goes to the third story. In the third story, we arrive at the top of those stairs. We have bedroom at the front, bedroom at the rear, home office / homework room in the middle, and another associated hall bath. And that's the twin.
Can we go back to the cottage for a second?
Sorry, which one?
Cottage.
The cottage. In bedroom number 2, I'm just curious about what, on the second floor.
So we're looking at,
CT 101.
Bedroom number 2.
Yeah, what's with the closet with the windows in it?
This right here?
Yeah,
The roof outside is an offset ridge for the garage, so we're trying to keep the eaves low facing the street. I don't want to make it too tall.
right.
So essentially, this becomes relatively low space with eaves, with windows down close to the floor. The idea is to break up the facade a little bit. And, it's not really getting light into the room. It's more of a look from the outside than anything else.
Okay, but that is a closet.
Correct. Yes. There is a second one. There may end up being some mechanicals in there, some ductwork. Usually end up needing to find little closets from small houses.
There's another closet in that bedroom, and this is more like a creative use of space instead of the main closet.
Excellent mechanical space. Not very good as a closet, so.
We have full basements in these buildings, so we'll be able to get it done.
And I also asked about the side building. Sorry, you said that one of the windows. Which of the windows are not real windows?
They're all real windows.
Well, the one that.
If you're looking at the front elevation of
But the side windows on the garage, are those gonna be?
these two windows on the garage, the bottom left on 3 CT200, those are the two windows I'm talking about.
Okay, and in the top left illustration there, those two windows on the first floor, those?
They're in this, these here?
Yeah, those windows.
Those are in the garage.
But they're gonna be just regular windows that look into the garage? Is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, daylight in there could be nice.
For the two pumps.
Let you know if you leave the light on overnight.
do any planning commissioners have any other questions or comments at this point before we ask for public comment? Anything else?
What, on the building that's being moved,
Yes.
is that going to be changing in height if you give it a new foundation? Is it-
We're still setting the first floor right now. Actually, we have a first floor height set, but I haven't analyzed exactly how this is going to be out of the ground. It's fairly far out right now. There's significant windows in that lower level. We have the ability to set it wherever we would like to. We're pretty close to wherever we'd like to.
Do you have a plan for what would happen if that moving the building failed, like if the house busted up on the way, or if there was structural damage, and what would happen?
to the building itself.
No, what would happen to your plan? What would you hope to recover from that plan?
If the house movers broke the house, I think that would be more Joe and Summer and their attorney than
And
Jack Burns. Yeah. I don't have a plan if they break that house.
Yeah, so, and maybe Jody can jump on, but, you know, we have really, when we decided that moving the house could be an option, which at first we're like, what? Then we went through the process of looking for a very capable organization to do that. As Jack mentioned, the organization that will do it is one of the few that specializes in moving a masonry home. And so Jack spent time, we've spent time to get comfortable with the idea and what happens for that.
I started our first meeting with them fairly skeptical and got off feeling very comfortable. They've done this to larger and more stone or jodier buildings than this one.
So, yes, I have a question about that. So what part of the building is actually moving and what's cut?
The building in its entirety,
Even the chimney?
even the chimney.
Now, there's like an on-grade deck almost in front of the porch that's not being retained. There's kind of a deck in the back part that's offset from the house, that's not, but everything apart the porches in the front and the back, we have to figure out how to get the post, or how to support the post or the overhead porch in the back, but we intend to keep all of it. To answer your question about height, the first floor elevation for the existing home right now is around, it's a little over 274. The proposed we have is about 269.5. Because that upper, just looking at plan view, the upper right is higher than the left, so it's coming down some, and the height according to the borough calculations is about 27 feet, so it's still it's not much higher than the twins and others that we have, and the twins are, the proposed first floor of the twins is 271.8, so even they will be lower than the existing house. The existing house is kind of high, so both will be a little lower.
I'm just wondering what would happen if, if the house failed to move. Would they need to submit a new application? Would we go through, and what would they be allowed to do?
Maybe Kevin can answer that.
Can I jump in for a second? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah. So I would implore, I was just as or more skeptical than all of you. And I would implore everyone to go to the website for the Wolf Moving Company, who we're going to be contracting to do this move. And you'll be amazed at the professionalism that they use and how slow everything moves. I do know that they're well insured. And the building that they're going to move, this existing building in Narberth, is child's play compared to some of the buildings and structures that they've moved and the distances that they've moved them. So it's entertaining, if nothing else, and also reassuring.
I look forward to watching that. It sounds fun, but I'm still curious.
I would jump in. Years ago, I worked with guys who moved the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. And these guys, they know what they're doing. I mean, I don't know what this particular firm is.
We don't need testimonials. The applicant is representing that they found a qualified person to do this. The question is what happens if it doesn't work. Kevin, do you have anything that you can bring to light?
We hope we don't have to go through that, but I think if the existing house were to, I guess, fall apart in that sense, they would have to construct a compliant single-family dwelling. That's the way we see it now anyway. And I think somebody, I apologize, I didn't know who was speaking about the elevation. While the building height is well under it, I would recommend that you make sure that the first floor facade never goes above the allowable limit, which you have a lot of wiggle room with that, but just to keep that in mind.
I just wanted to ask, we've got trees at the perimeter here, but the location, the distance here 14 feet, obviously a little tight to put any vegetation for privacy between these houses. Have you looked at all at how the windows are in alignment or out of alignment for the privacy of the occupant? And part of what I'm asking is also just to say that one of the beautiful things about living in Narberth, or in this region for that matter, is the four seasons. And if you have a tree outside of your window, you get the atmosphere of the season inside your house, and it really is part of the environment. And I'm just wondering here, in terms of how the fenestration maybe aligns or doesn't align, how is that? Have you looked at that?
Well, for the cottages in the rear, for sure, the reason they're not mirrored over each other is because they're trying to put the non-important sides facing the important side. So the masters are on the same sides, which means they're not next to each other. And that, for the twins, the one faces the neighbor's property. I have not looked, the short answer is I have not looked at how the windows in the new will match up with the windows in the relocated adjacent structure. They make sense for the building itself to give the best options for the new home itself.
But is 14 feet too tight to do any planting, or?
No.
No. I mean, even with the canopy?
Well, you're not gonna plant the white oak in there, you know, but you can certainly, there are columnar trees that will do fine in 14 feet if they have sunlight.
Yeah.
You just have to pick species that are suitable.
I mean, I would make a recommendation for some kind of buffer, you know, for like a tree buffer or something to, you know, create the individual lots within the lot, more than just the house itself.
Yeah, I follow what you're saying.
Trees.
Yes.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so if there are no more questions from Planning Commission or comments from Chloe, we will turn to public comment. We will start with Mr. Schoenfeld. You're here tonight. So we will ask for you to share your thoughts. I did see your email.
Yes.
But please go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm David Schoenhard, Pennsylvania architect of over 43 years. My wife, Colleen, and I live at 131 Marion Avenue for 39 years. We are located diagonally across the street from 146 Marion. Historically, this property was intended to have one vacant side yard lot, which could have an additional house built upon. Many homes in Narberth have had this arrangement, including our personal home, where the side yard was developed during the depths of the Depression in the 1930s. 146 Marion is not an issue of concern for the owner, who is also the developer. They are doing what developers do. They make as much return on their investment as possible, regardless of the effect on the neighborhood. Instead, 146 Marion is an issue for the borough and the Planning Commission and the Zoning Board to determine if they want to keep Narberth, or if they want to allow it to densify beyond our recognition. With each new development allowed, they do not bring affordable, diverse housing, but instead increasingly expensive and aesthetically monotonous housing stock at an increasingly out-of-reach cost. The development scenarios for 146 have been long and increasingly alarming. This property's development plans started out as the existing house with a new back-to-back twin in the side yard, which would require a variance, but the neighbors said this could be possible. This then moved to tearing down the historically beautiful house and building 4 bulbous, oversized twins. This then moved to now physically picking up and moving the existing historic house, tearing down the historic trees, and building two reasonably sized twins facing Marion and two small single cottages units facing Rockland. Here is our concern. Moving a large historic house is astronomically expensive, and the developer will next claim a hardship due to its expense and wish instead to tear it down. The relocated historic house, as planned, does not have a garage or driveway, thus its cars, as in plural, will end up on our already crowded street. The two new twins facing Marion also do not have garages or driveways, so they too will add cars, plural, to our already crowded street. The newly enacted cottage ordinance, I understood, was not to be used for stand-alone small houses, but as adjunct guest or apartments to the primary dwelling. So to 146, develop as you try. So to the Borough Planning and Zoning Board, please push back by using the power of your government to protect and serve our community. There are absolutely no extenuating circumstances or hardships that should be considered for exceptions or variances. This developer may be allowed to develop only by right and not to develop because they think they have the right. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to apologize for misstating your name.
Oh,
Mr. Schoen.
sorry.
I misstated your name when I recognized you.
It's George David Schoenhardt,
Yes.
131 Marion Avenue.
Right, and I misstated that, so I apologize.
I'm sorry.
I also would like to clarify one point of your comments. This is not a proposal to create accessory dwelling units. That was one ordinance that was passed in recent months. The cottages are a different kind of housing type, which are meant to be standalone housing types, and those were created through the enactment of the historic district overlay zoning. So those are two different things, and so they are not actually using the provisions of the code which allow for accessory dwelling units in this application. I just wanted to clarify that. You understand there were two different ordinances that were passed, one for accessory dwellings and one for cottages. They were different things. Okay. So that's just a clarification. Okay, so we have a few members of the public who are participating by Zoom. And so I will ask if there's anybody, any members of the public who are participating by Zoom who would like to speak. If you would like to speak, please either let us know by chatting or let us know by raising your hand. Okay, well, while we are on this item, while we're receiving public comment, if you would like to be recognized, let me know. I'll turn to comments that I received by email, which I will read for the benefit of the public. Second, I'm going to find one here. So the first one I received is from Colin Phillips, 130 Marion Avenue, signed by Colin Phillips and Diane Phillips. Please be advised we are the owners and occupants of 130 Marion Avenue, directly adjacent to 146 Marion Avenue. Although we're not able to attend the planning meeting July 11th, we've become aware of Ms. Knight and Mr. Havlick's request for subdivision of the lot to allow for 5 homes and are strongly opposed to it. In addition to the ongoing noise pollution due to lengthy construction, we are concerned about the increased risk of flooding during heavy rains as a result of the permanent displacement of soluble land. We are on the downslope from that property and already have drainage issues which require constant management as it is. Furthermore, parking space on Marion Avenue is already at a premium. Ms. Knight and Mr. Havlick no longer reside in Narberth, and therefore we believe they have prioritized their profit over the community's best interest. As such, we ask their request be denied. I also received an email from Adam Glazing, I hope I'm saying that correctly, who poses a number of questions. One, it seems that most residents would like to understand what the process is that the Planning Commission has with 146 Marion and other subdivision projects. Would this process and steps please be explained? I can explain that in a moment. Does this proposed subdivision creation / design / plans of 146 going from 1 lot to 5 lots meet the zoning code and other requirements of Narberth? Including frontage, impervious surface, etc. Does this proposed subdivision meet the spirit and intention of the zoning code of Narberth? And then there's a comment. The 100 block of Marion Avenue is at present the most densely populated part of South Narberth, excluding apartment buildings. There are a lot of homes in this proposed subdivision, and the crowded nature creates limited backyard and free space. The open space on Marion Avenue will be diminished, many more cars. Is there anybody else, either in the, and Mr. Pazin has said that he agrees with Mr. Schoenhart's comments. I just received that message. Anyone else, either online or in the room, who'd like to comment? We'll close public comments on this agenda item. I would like to ask, not right this second, but in a moment, Mr. Young, would you be able to respond to the questions that were raised about stormwater? Not this moment. I'm going to address one of the other questions, but I just wanted to alert you. I'll answer I believe that, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Kazin also provided one other question, which I'll ask if anyone on your team would like to respond to, which is affordability, what prices are these houses going for? So think about whether you have an answer you'd like to provide. I'm going to start by answering the question about that Mr. Kazin raised about the Planning Commission process and about whether or not this proposal meets the zoning and other requirements of Narberth and the intention of the code. This project is submitted as a land development application. The general process for a land development application is that a person wishing to submit such an application contacts the borough and often has an informal conversation with the borough staff about the application to ask and get answers to questions about zoning and other codes before they submit their application. The first formal step is that the applicant submits what we have today, which is called a tentative sketch plan. The purpose of that plan is really to, although we're going into great detail today about things like windows and trees and grades, it's really to make sure that the project conforms to the zoning code. That's the main purpose of this step of the process. And to assess whether or not other approvals, such as zoning hearing board approvals, are needed. That application is reviewed by the Planning Commission, is also sent to the Shade Tree Commission and to the Historic Architecture Review Board in situations where the HARB has jurisdiction over the project. Planning Commission reviews the application as we are tonight, and then forwards a recommendation to Borough Council. We are not a body that approves, we simply make recommendations to the Borough Council. And if we do make a recommendation tonight, the Borough Council would then put it on an agenda for an upcoming meeting. The next potential meeting is later this month, third Thursday in July. Borough Council is the entity which is empowered to accept or reject an application and to discuss with the applicant whether any conditions might be put on the approval of an application. That's the tentative sketch plan. Same process repeats itself 2 more times. There's a preliminary plan. So the applicant, having received their tentative approval, then does all of the work in terms of stormwater, landscaping, grading, all the detailed engineering and design of the project, brings it back for what's called preliminary plan approval. Same process, consultations with borough staff, review by the planning commission, and final, the planning commission makes recommendations, and final acceptance or rejection or acceptance with conditions by borough council. And then finally, the last step, final plan, is really where the applicant makes any kind of final adjustments in their plan that are necessary as a result of comments they've received. And again, the same process, planning commission review, recommendation, and borough council. Those are a three-step cycle that we have in Narberth. All of these plans are posted on the borough webpage as soon as they're received and declared to be complete applications, so you can find them on the webpage. The Planning Commission transmits its recommendations to borough council in writing. And those recommendations are posted on the webpage, and the Planning Commission section of the webpage as well. And our discussions are recorded in our minutes, which are posted about a month after the meeting where the conversation occurs. So that in general is the process. Does the proposed subdivision creation design plans of 146 Marion meet the zoning code? That is what we have a borough engineer and a borough zoning officer for. They review the plans on behalf of the borough to assess whether or not the plans meet the zoning code. They issue letters which are sent to the applicant, which offer comments and outline areas where the proposal or the application may or may not be compliant with our various codes. So you heard tonight that there were 7 items that the borough zoning officer raised, and the applicant is agreeing to comply with 5 of them at this point, and that 2 others will be complied with, one by seeking a special exception and the other at the next phase of review. So those letters are not generally posted, but can be requested from the borough office. I'm sorry, the Montgomery County Planning Commission also reviews the projects as well on behalf of the borough, and also issues its own review letters. This occurs at each step of the process. So, is this meet the zoning code and other requirements? Tonight, the assessment of the zoning officer and the borough engineer is that at this stage of the process, the application does. There will be other requirements that have to be examined at further stages of the process. Does the proposed subdivision meet the spirit and intention of the zoning code of Narberth? That is for the planning commission members each to assess on their own, so I cannot speak with them. That's what we're here to do tonight. But I will say that this proposed subdivision does make use of recently approved amendments to the zoning code that, that relate to infill development in historic districts. The purpose of that code, that zoning amendment, is to provide owners of historic properties who are now required, essentially required not to demolish their houses, to provide them with additional opportunities to develop sites, properties which might once have been developed by demolishing the house. And that's in exchange for the obligation the owners are taking on at the public's request to not tear down their houses and preserve their houses. This applicant actually has an approved tentative plan to demolish the house and replace it with new construction. And upon learning of the borough's concerns about that, has willingly brought this alternative plan forward in which the historic house is being preserved and development, the rest of the lot is being developed. So I would say, for myself, I cannot speak for the commission, that this proposed subdivision does meet the spirit and intention of the zoning code of Marion. And for the other planning commission members, we'll have an opportunity to discuss that in a minute. So I hope that answers your questions. I will ask if Mr. Yon can discuss the storm. I will say to the public who's watching, this is not the phase of the project in which stormwater management is normally developed, nor is the applicant at this phase of the process obligated to address these issues. But obviously, the applicant has to be thinking about them and assessing the overall practicality of their site. So I will ask Mr. Yon if he wouldn't mind addressing your questions about stormwater management on this property, understanding that it is not an expectation that this is the applicant is at the state where there are fully studied and engineered solutions. So Mr. Yon, if there's anything you can say, we'd appreciate that.
Yes, I'm going to start with page 2. I don't know if it's possible to put that on the screen as well. Page 2 shows the existing house in the upper right-hand corner of the lot, and it shows the existing topography. So behind that house is a 274 contour, and as you move towards the upper left, it goes to 273, 272, so you get up to the front around 265, 264. And so what that shows you is that there are not any stormwater facilities on the site currently. There's no pipes, inlets, stormwater management systems. And so when it rains on the lot, the water drains towards that front left corner, and probably some goes off to the neighbor's property. Once the development is, and if I could just real quickly, I know I've said it to this board before, but the way that I explain stormwater to homeowners is that when it rains in a field, some of the water seeps into the ground, and what doesn't runs off slowly. When it rains in a parking lot, or basically any impervious surface, none of it seeps into the ground, and so it runs off quickly. And so the two main design components are how much water infiltrates into the ground, and then how quickly it leaves. And so those are the two main things that we need to design a stormwater system for. And so what we have proposed, although as you said, Mr. Gressy, we didn't do the full calculations yet, but we have thought about where we would put stormwater management, and we're showing systems in the front of each lot. And so all of the roof area would be piped to those systems, likely some yard area as well would be piped to those systems for that infiltration part and the rate control part of the township code. And so whereas it used to be that some runoff would leave the site, go up to the neighbors, now almost all of it will be controlled and going to those stormwater systems where the water will be allowed to infiltrate into the ground and slow down from leaking. We did do some preliminary infiltration tests, which yielded acceptable average results.
Okay.
And how did trees affect that? Planting trees around that?
Well, in terms, so planting trees helps with stormwater. The more leaves you have,
Well, I mean, planting trees near your stormwater, catchment areas.
So when we go to design the system, we'll try to stay recent. So we think about for an existing tree, how we can stay away from, if we can, we stay in the drip line. If we have to be in the drip line a little bit, we might cut the tree back, and we try to stay out of that main part of the root system. For proposed trees, we try to keep them away. I think to keep in mind, these trees that are shown here as street trees are in between the curb and the sidewalk. And behind the sidewalk, there's a few feet up to where the right-of-way is. The stormwater system is behind that and lower. And so I don't view these trees as likely to be issues with the underground stormwater system. As we go through this process, there will be other trees. We will, for the preliminary plan stage, we'll have a landscape plan prepared by a registered landscape architect who will show many other trees and bushes throughout the site, and they will be mindful more than, they'll help me with that, where I'll show a design and they'll help with where can trees reasonably grow around that. So right now, these are more just kind of placeholders for what will have to be in the future.
Okay. All right. Hey, I have a technical question, just from our, speak up.
do you ever put the stormwater retention system under the porch?
So we do get questions one of the ones I get a lot is, can we put it under a parking garage? I'm not sure why that, I guess oftentimes when you have a property that has, an apartment building and a very big parking garage and there's limited space around it, they say, well, can't you put it in? And so I always talk people out of that. And it would be similar with a porch. Because as much as we do our best to design extra maintenance facilities so that
So you can't dig it up later is the problem, is that what you're saying?
What's that?
You can't dig it up later.
Right, you'd have to dig up the porch as well. And so I always recommend they stay out, just in case there was ever a need for repair.
Understood, thank you.
Chris, is it accurate to say that in the event of a major storm event, that these systems are designed to have equal or less runoff from the property than exists now?
Yes, the stormwater management code requires that we design for rate control up to and including 100 years. And so there'll be a reduction from the property in all the storms.
Wait, are you asking for stormwater?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm just curious, based on that, do you have a way of measuring what the actual runoff is at this moment, such that it could be compared later? I mean, I know that's not something we can force, but out of curiosity, the real world impact, what is the runoff now versus what might be the runoff in the future?
So I'm kind of bound by whatever the municipal code is. Most codes have an inch per hour requirement for different storm events. Some codes will require that you go to NOAA, where you actually go to the chart and it's as up to date as NOAA is. My design would have to be. Off the top of my head, I believe that Margaret has confirmed amounts. Or do we have to go?
No, I believe it's referring to, it's either to the PennDOT table or NOAA, but it links back to the NOAA tables, yes.
Other than that, I've never had a project where you would try to tell what was there on site. You would need some type of rain gauge that someone trusted was reviewed and maintained properly throughout time to determine what the rainfall was.
I think maybe, he's getting with the amount of rain, maybe this would answer as well. When you do the stormwater design, they're running calculations based on the type of coverage that is on the site now. That you do calculate a baseline number, and then that is compared to what the proposed condition will be. So there's a pre and post modeling of the existing and post conditions that they are comparing, and that rate, any increase that would occur from putting new impervious coverage needs to be managed as part of the system. So the pre and the post model.
Okay. There was one other question. Does anyone on the applicant's team care to answer the question of what prices the houses will be going for?
I think the answer is we don't know at this point. I'm sure there are some thoughts as to what might be a target, but the preliminary and really the final analysis is going to be, to a significant extent, a function of all of the improvement costs that are necessitated, which at this point we don't know what they are. A lot of them will relate to stormwater management, grading, if walls are involved. So I think it's open on that, but obviously they will be designed, the price will be designed to sell units.
Okay. I only have one other question, and then we'll see if we can discuss the recommendation we make, and that is, are any of the actions related to the existing house going to be actions that would require either a certificate of appropriateness or an advisory review by the park? Aware of any, which would be enumerated in the code as changing the building footprint by removing volume, changing a building height by demolition of whole or partial stories, changing a building's volume by removal of towers, turret spires, changing the shape, slope, configuration of a roof or roof line by removing dormers or putting in sleeping porches. And I could read them all, but have you evaluated that? Do you know if you will have to seek either certificate of appropriateness or advisory review?
The short answer is, I'm not sure. This is, I guess, from my perspective, the first time I've ever worked on a project where we're moving the house. That being said, we're all working with the borough to try to find that out. We've asked, we know when the next part meeting is. It's tomorrow, I believe. And so we have asked, when is it appropriate for us to present to HARB, if so. And so I think to this point, the answer is not yet. And once we get through the tentative sketch phase, will be more appropriate.
Kevin, do you have a CU?
Yeah, at this time, we don't believe there's going to be either an advisory review or COA required. But again, as the plan develops, we may make that requirement.
And that's because they are not undertaking any of the actions in the code that trigger those reviews?
That's actually there because they have an open demolition permit for the existing structure. So if they were to voluntarily remove the structure now, they could do it by right.
Is there a termination date for the demolition permit?
Would you care to answer that? Is there
I didn't hear the
is there a termination date for the current demolition permit?
There is. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. That's my answer.
I'm just curious.
Do you know, Kevin?
In general, yeah.
Yeah, if you guys give me 10 or 15 seconds, I can pull it up.
Okay. While Kevin is pulling that up, I will invite discussion and or a recommendation from anyone on the commission that you'd like to make to council.
I have a quick question. Just what's the square footage of the garage, the existing garage? Do you know offhand? Because I don't see it separately listed.
Sorry, are you speaking of the garage cottage?
The existing garage. No, the existing garage. I'm just curious for comparison. 400 square feet or something?
I don't have it broken out on the plan, but my guess is a little more.
Yeah, 20 by 20 or something. Okay.
Well, Kevin is, Kevin, did you find that information?
Yeah, so the date for the permit for the demolition is October 5th of this year. However, if it's a written request made for an additional extension, we can extend that another 6 months if necessary.
Okay, so they're typically a year? They last for a year?
Correct.
Okay.
Existing garage is about 570 square feet.
Okay. So I'll either accept if someone would like to propose a resolution or about what you would like to recommend to council, or we can go around and ask each planning commissioner to make a comment that you'd like to share with the rest of us about this. Would anyone like to offer a resolution at this point? And I will ask,
Well, sure, I'll offer a resolution. I would offer the resolution that we recommend approval of this tentative sketch plan to Borough Council as it is presented to us tonight. Full stop. I've also got a question about the garages. The only aspect of this that troubles me a little bit, because these are fictional garages. And what happens to the application if we title them storage and be truthful about it? Because it's not a garage and it never will be. I think anybody that thinks about putting a car in there knows that no one's ever going to put a car in there. Given the fact that the cottages are on the small side, which is fine, that was the intention. But we all have stuff. We have bikes and lawnmowers and table saws and pool tables. The stuff of life, and that's what's going to go in these spaces. And I think that's cool. I do the same thing with my so-called garage,
So
which
I'm
was built in the
gonna,
20s.
in order to keep the conversation going, so we can get through our agenda tonight,
So
I will.
what happens if that space is labeled something other than a garage? What happens to the logic of this application?
We'll ask that when we're done.
Okay.
We'll keep that and ask that when we're done. So what I'll do is just ask everyone to go around and either share your own thoughts or responses to Jim's point. So Dave, then we'll just go around so everyone can have a chance. Dave, would you like to?
Yeah, I agree with Jim. I think there's a real question to be asked about whether this application could be made to proceed with the change of that space from garage to storage. But I would like to compliment the applicant on their efforts to save the house. I think that was certainly my objective from the beginning, and I appreciate the immense amount of work and effort that went into making that happen. I could quibble about aspects of the application, but I think in the end, I think it really does respond to what we've been talking about the last couple of years, and I would vote for it to be approved and sent on to the next step.
Okay, Adam, thank you.
I personally don't think it matters that much if the garage is too small. The garage is too small. It's, it should be a little bigger to fit anything but like a small car would fit, a Mini Cooper or something like that. But even if it was a Mini Cooper, they still might just park in the driveway, and that is what happens on a lot of driveways now, so I don't really see the difference. And if you have a garage for storage, you're likely to put your bicycle, your lawnmower, etc. I'm not really that concerned, personally. I mean, I think if you were trying to sell the house, you might want to make it a little bigger, but I think the logic of this, how we got here, that you could, obviously if you had subdivided into 2 lots, you could have 2 houses. And for those people that are concerned about affordability, that would only be 1 extra house over today, and that house would be more expensive probably than the smaller cottages will end up. Maybe you'll see, kind of what the market will bear. But, so that wouldn't necessarily create any affordability, and it probably wouldn't have that much difference in terms of the impact of the trees that would be coming out. To get more lots requires moving the historic house if you want to save that house. And apparently moving the house to a new foundation is why you would move it from one side of the lot to the other instead of sliding it forward. And that's how you end up with the site plan you have and how you maximize the number of units, which is, I think, about maximizing the revenue from the lot, but where we've also have essentially very expensive development conditions to meet, and does result in more housing units, which if you care about affordability is probably the right strategy for trying to have as many affordable, or at least semi-affordable dwellings. So I think when you consider all the moving parts to this application, and you especially consider that they apparently have a demolition permit already, and we already had a plan already through tentative approval, this would seem to be a far better outcome. Thank you.
Yeah, Jim.
I have a number of comments, but first I want to talk about if those garages were labeled storage, I think they would just simply be storage sheds. It's allowed to have, particularly detached utility buildings that don't count toward building footprint. I don't think there's a problem with that. I think they would still go to zoning hearing board and receive permission to park in the side lot without a garage. So I think, it's one or the other. It doesn't really matter. Personally, I would love to have a tiny little garage. I hope to have a tiny garage in my house. So I don't think that's really an issue. Among my comments, I have just one big concern, which is, as I was saying earlier, what happens if the building fails to move to where it's intended? I understand it's likely to get there, but I really feel like we ought to have a contingency in place, particularly since we're allowing this entire development for, you know, with the understanding that this house is being saved. If the house is not saved, then, you know, we can't really retract permission for the rest of these houses.
But I think that's a solicitor question, Jim.
Okay.
That's not.
Well, I would just suggest that if the original house is not going to go where it's intended, we're left with an undersized lot that would not have otherwise been allowed. And it looks to me like the only thing you can really build on that lot is another cottage. I'm just putting that out as a comment or suggestion. I feel like it would require a whole other process. Okay, anyway, that said, I'm in favor of this plan. I think there are a good number of benefits of this plan over the existing plan. The existing plan, which has some degree of approval, I'm not really sure. I still have a lot of issues with the existing plan, and I think that would have to get worked out. It would be a tough thing for me to work through the original plan. But this new plan has about 100, even though there are 5 lots now, as opposed to 4 lots with the 2 big twins, there is less building footprint. There's about 100 square feet less building footprint of this plan overall. There's about 500 square feet less impervious coverage overall, which are both big improvements. The heights of the new 4 buildings are lower than just about anything that gets built in Narberth these days. And particularly on the 2 cottages being built, as far as I know, these will be the only 2 buildings with floor space under 1,800 square feet that have been built in Narberth in many years, even possibly many decades. These are the smallest houses that will be built. I'm sure there'll be nice houses, there'll be modern houses, they'll probably fetch a good price, but in terms of living area, they fill a niche that just does not get filled in Narberth these days, and I think that's very welcome. There'll be lower houses that have been built in Narberth in a long time, they'll be smaller in floor space, and I think that's a good thing. And what's more, I believe this plan has less impervious coverage and less building footprint than even the old zoning code, the one that we got rid of in 2015, than that would have allowed. So I think everything considered, this is a good plan, and I'm in favor of it.
Okay, Jen.
I would also like to commend 146 Marion team for working with the borough to improve upon the plan from which we started. I do think this is a far better outcome for a number of reasons that have already been mentioned. I do sort of share the concern about density, but I'm not really concerned. I think, if there's a fabric established in terms of lot size, introducing this plan, I think it's not my area of expertise, but from what I've read and what I've heard, and I think what Adam was getting at, density does help with affordability. I like the cottage size. I like the diversity, which was mentioned in your presentation. And I would recommend approval to council.
Heidi, thank you.
Yeah, Jim said something that I really wasn't even aware of, that the lot is so small for the moved house. And I didn't see that in anybody's letters. Did anyone mention?
I almost wrote something more about it, but I did just note that it's quite a bit smaller than would normally be permitted for a single-family detached home in this district. It does meet the code in my assessment and, you know, Kevin would agree with that, but the historic overlay district that allowed, the code amendment that allows the cottages says that the number of principal buildings on the lot shall not exceed the number of principal buildings that could be built if the contributing resources were not present and the lot were subdivided according to the minimum lot widths required, but not the minimum lot area required. So the code says, like, let's say you demolish the home, how many lots can you get out of that lot? And you can have that many buildings, except it only looks at lot width. And I wonder if this body wants to consider in the future also considering lot area. I wouldn't, I don't,
Yeah,
not
I saw that
proposing anything
mentioned.
that would
Okay.
impact this proposal. But that's kind of where I was getting at, that you end up having quite a small, the lot area is quite a bit smaller than would normally be permitted by code for the existing home.
So the current lot width meets the requirements, then you're saying?
Yes. It meets the lot
And the lot
width
size.
requirements, but not the lot area requirements without that, the overlay. But
And it's because it's an historic house on the lot, still qualifies as an historic house, even though
There's
it's
a
being
provision
moved.
that allows for within the 5-lot subdivision, for one lot may be too small, one lot may be larger than allowed, as long as it all averages out. So that the sum of the lots equals the sum that you would need to do that house. One lot could be smaller, one lot could be bigger.
it doesn't though, only lot width, not lot
That's
area.
right.
Yeah,
It's linear,
it's
but lot area
width.
was carefully calibrated, Chloe.
Okay, great.
We studied that carefully.
Okay.
I believe Chris actually broke that down at some point of his plan, where he broke down what a detached house would need, what a cottage would need, and the sum was less than I believe 25,000 square foot will be required. I believe they met that requirement.
Okay.
Chloe, the reason lot area is not the factor is because we want to allow for flexibility in the way that lots are sized, given that historic houses just appear on lots in all kinds of random ways. The reason lot width is used is as a controlling factor for the number of units you can create. And this lot, actually, I think they could have created 5 units in a multiple family dwelling, or I believe I measured that they could have created 8 units by building 8 small twins. So technically,
It's 8, yeah.
they could have created 8 units prior to the historic district ordinance. So they were actually creating fewer units than they could have created. They could have torn this house down and built 8 units if they wanted to, 8 small twins. They chose to build, they have a proposal for 4 large twins, but they could have built 8 small twins. So they're building, by many measures, less square footage, number of units, than could have been possible under different scenarios. And that's all carefully, when we did the infill zoning, it was all carefully looked at. Anyway, Heidi, that was a question. Do you have any comments you'd like to make?
I mean, my gut reaction is the same as other people's here, that the scale of the development is not out of scale with the area of the borough that it's in. I mean, if you look across Rockland Avenue, there's quite a few small houses. If you look down across the street, there's quite a few small houses that are basically laid out in a similar fashion. I understand the concerns of the neighbors who have large lots, and now they're going to be living next to a compact development. But it is in keeping with basically the intent of the code, the form zoning code. And I appreciate that the cottages are low scale on Rockland. I think that's the first thing.
So you were in support of this? I'll make a comment as well, and then a suggestion to amend your resolution. My comment is, first, I, along with my colleagues, would like to express my appreciation to your whole team for thinking through your approach to this and patiently waiting for our code changes to occur, and I think faithfully trying to propose a project that does meet the letter, the spirit, and the intention of the code. It's deeply, deeply appreciated. And we understand that comes at a cost to you, so especially appreciated. I think to the community, I would say the hardest trade-off we have at the Planning Commission these days is the trade-off between open space and infill development and the affordable housing. And they are not always easily reconcilable. As you've heard us say many times, while Mr. Schoenhardt referred nostalgically to the 1930s when people took a lot and subdivided it and built another lot, nowadays people build more. And that's been the way Narberth has been built. And we live in a world, in a community, where if people have open space, they are entitled to build on it. And as much as we'd like that open space, it is private property. So we can't simply say no to developments because we would rather have them be open space. If the borough wants open space, it has to find other policies to have the open space the residents want. In terms of the number of units, I think I personally, and I think many of us are of the philosophy that we are in a walkable community, we are in a transit-oriented community, and that we can bear the burden of a few additional units in town. I think we also recognize that the more homes we have, the more people we have, the more people support our businesses, they support our community organizations and institutions. Bringing new people to town breathes new life into all those committees and those activities that we love, from Little League to the 4th of July committee. And so I generally, myself, look favorably on bringing more homes out to the community, but calibrated really, as everyone here has been saying, to make sure that what is added is in keeping as much as possible with the scale of our community. Parking is another hard issue. I think at the Planning Commission, we're inclined to think that we're not just planning for people today, but we're thinking about the future. And I think all of us, to one degree or another, are thinking about a future which is less reliant on cars. We have to think about building on our asset of being a walkable, transit-oriented community, and not building a community that makes it easy to drive cars around. I think it's fair to say we share that philosophy. I also think, the reason these 3 houses on the Marion Avenue side do not have parking or driveways is that our zoning code allows each house to count one space, it's a one-space credit to not have parking in the 3B zone, and they also can use curb length to fulfill their parking requirements as well. And allowing a property owner to count the curb length in front of their house as a parking spot for their house seems inherently fair to me. Just because other people got there first and live on the block and are parking there now, doesn't seem to me to be fair to say to a property owner, you can't use your curb for a parking space. So this development would use 3 parking spaces on the curb in front of a 100-foot lot. Seems perfectly reasonable to me. And I live on Essex Avenue, Dudley Avenue. It's a very congested area near an apartment building. I know what it's like to live on a block where lots of people park, but I think it's not unreasonable to allow a property owner to have to count the curb in front of their house as parking. So I struggle with these questions all the time because people bring them to us for every development that comes here. But I think it's important to tell the community and the public the reasoning behind why I at least support projects like this. So I too am in support of this project. The amendments I'd like to add to your resolution, Jim, are to recommend this project's approval to council, to ask if the borough could ask the solicitor at the time council considers this to weigh in on the question of what happens if the house cannot be moved or is damaged during the move. It's not a question for us to answer. The solicitor can think through what would occur in that situation and can inform council and inform us before final decisions are made. The second amendment I make is, I think there's I would say there's complete agreement about the garages, but I would like to ask the applicant when they come back with the preliminary to be able, or tonight if you can, to answer the question, what would the development look like? What would the impact be if you did not count that space as a garage? I'm not so sure they would be able to get a special exception, but I think that would be worth asking you. If you did not count that space as a garage and just counted it as a storage area, what would the impact be on your your development? Is that something you can answer tonight, or is that something that would be answerable in the future? Okay, so would you be able to answer that question then when you come in for the next round for the preliminary? So that would be my two amendments, Jim, to your resolution.
Just quickly, I guess, how would that be counted as far as square footage goes then?
Well, that's what we're asking you. And we're asking, I don't know the answer. If you knew, that would be great if you could tell us. I don't know, Kevin, do you know offhand what the impact would be if they didn't call that a garage?
Yeah, I mean, my gut reaction, obviously, I know the new ordinance, I've only kind of read through specific to this project, but I believe if that was counted as storage, I think it would maybe still be included as part of the gross floor area, which would put them over the maximum allowable for a cottage. From that perspective, also, it would require a variance for parking within the second lot layer, surface parking anyway, rather than a special exception. So I think there are two implications of that.
I suspected as much.
So they need a variance to park in front of the house, like in the driveway.
Not a variance, it's a special exception.
No, yeah, surface parking is a variance unless it's tucked in the third lot layer.
10 feet beyond the second lot. Right. Because of where it occurs. So I guess hearing that, does that change your thoughts about anything?
Well, there is an issue in my mind about establishing a precedent for what constitutes a garage. From a practical standpoint, the issue is getting in and out of a vehicle in a 9'6" width. It's pretty tough. And from a practical standpoint, it's not practical. Which is to say it's impractical. Not to make too much of a deal out of it.
Well, I'm looking for a path forward here. So is there
what's that, a path forward?
Is there a suggestion you can make?
You could make a carport out of it. You would park undercover, which keeps the bird droppings off your car, houses your car, but you're not calling it a garage. So the next person that comes down the pike can't propose a garage that's even narrower and then point back to this as a precedent for a very small parking space called a garage.
I mean,
That's my concern.
Does the building code say how big a garage has to be?
No, it describes a parking space.
Yeah, there's no dimensions in the zoning or building code.
Would it be, Jim, would it be acceptable to you to say that at this stage we would approve this, at the preliminary phase we would like to see an exploration of alternatives, design alternatives for that?
Sure.
To explore the practicality of other approaches?
This is not a huge impediment in my mind to moving forward with this project. It's sort of a technical question. I worry about the future a little bit with this.
Would you be willing to come back at the preliminary phase or even before for an information session to show us some options for how that garage could be designed, considering that some people in the commission don't feel it's actually a functional garage?
Yes, I mean, my initial reaction is if it wasn't a garage and we needed a parking space, it would have to be in the third lot layer, which there's not enough room for it to be perpendicular to the street, would have to be parallel to the street. So I'm envisioning like a common driveway in the middle and then branching out to a parking space on either side, which would take a lot of the backyard. That's my initial reaction on what would be a compliant solution.
Chris, I think he's suggesting more along the lines of if you shove things around by 6 inches here and there, can you?
Yeah, I think
You make an 11-foot garage. But anyway, I don't want to
Yeah.
solve the problem today.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm asking.
I
is,
think
would
we're
you-
understanding this is a very schematic plan.
Well, and I just want to say, like, the garage it would be better if it was a little bigger as a garage. I lived in Philadelphia. You can park in this garage. You will have to breathe out getting out of the
You
car.
have a tiny
I mean,
corner.
like, I don't want to debate the garage anymore.
Right.
I want to
But I
get
just,
to it.
but I
All
think it's
wanna-
important because I think,
Adam, please. We don't need to debate where you like to park your car. All I'm asking is, would you be willing, between now and the preliminary approval, to explore other options for the garage, either figuring out if it can be bigger or other options for meeting the parking requirement that are compliant with the code? Just to satisfy us that we've looked at a range of options, and I think the concerns have been made clear. I don't think any of us feels like this is something that would result in us not wanting to approve the project. But I think it's an element of the project we'd like to see studied a little further. Would you be willing to do that? Can we agree to land there? Okay, if you'd like to come back for an informal presentation of that idea in advance of the preliminary stage, that would be fine. Or if there's a way we can explore that. I think that's the only aspect of this right now. I mean, the landscaping question you raised is normally one that's raised at the next phase of the development. But I think that's the only kind of thing we feel would like to see a little more study of. And Jim, is it acceptable to you to ask the solicitor to issue guidance on what would happen if the house could not physically be moved? What would happen to this approval?
Yeah.
Okay.
Could we express to the solicitor? I guess it's obvious, the concern, but, again, the whole point of this is to save an historic house.
Jim, I don't want to beat this to the...
Okay.
Would it be agreeable to you to ask the solicitor to weigh in on your question?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Because it's almost 9 o'clock and we have 3 more agenda items. Okay, so we have a resolution that the Narberth Planning Commission would recommends approval of this tentative sketch plan. We ask that the applicant between now and the preliminary plan submission explore further the parking and specifically the size of the garage on the Rockland Avenue cottages, and that we request if the solicitor could provide information about what the status of this approval would be if, in moving the house were damaged and not rendered livable or usable anymore. I think that captures everyone's thoughts. So I'll ask if we could have a vote on that.
Can I just read it back for 1 second? For the sorry, not the fastest typing. So just what you said is the Narberth Planning Commission recommends approval of the tentative sketch plan, asks that the garage dimensions be explored further to make it easier to park, requests the solicitor what the status of the application would be if moving the house is not successful.
Yes. I wouldn't necessarily garage dimensions, I would just explore the parking.
Well, that's so vague. I just want to capture something that captures what you want it to be, so. Further explore the parking, it's a very vague statement. So what does it mean,
Good.
Okay. All right, so by offering amendments to the resolution, I'm seconding it. So all in favor of the resolution?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, well, thank you. Thanks very much. You are moving along with your journey. Thank you. Okay, we have 3 more items on our agenda, all of which I'd like to cover so that we can have council consider these further. I need about a 1-minute break. you don't mind, so why don't we stretch and we'll come back in 1 minute.
That's the only thing you can control.
It's funny that we don't say how big a garage is.
Yeah.
We go to great lengths over the years to debate how big a parking space should be.
Well, it stands to reason that it can't be smaller than a parking space.
Right, I think that was what Kevin was saying, that it.
Parking space.
Parking space,
8 by 8.
9 by 18.
Yeah, but it hasn't been for long. It was 10 by 20, just about 20 minutes ago.
Well, you're about, but that's about the only requirement anywhere.
Yeah.
10 by 20.
Well, no, but parking lot space in a parking lot is 9 by 18, and sometimes even less than that if it's a compact space in a garage. So I'm telling you, this would comply with a compact parking space you mentioned. This won't fit every car. It'll fit a Mini Cooper just fine.
But even if it
And you can, like, you know,
even if it were bigger.
maybe use a discount. But even if it was 12 by 20 or 22, you can still park in the driveway.
People are gonna put their bikes and lawnmower in the garage, park in the driveway, even if it's bigger, I think that's what we do.
It depends on how much you want to keep your car in
Started out in a garage that was full of stuff with the kills, I can help you.
With the car?
Right.
No, but not.
Now it's even better for the pool tables.
Oh, yeah, they're like not flying over, like stuff.
Yeah, we have outdoor furniture, bicycles.
Right.
Kids stuff multiplying out for that.
Just ready to tackle this element.
There's a comment in the chat.
During the break, you're not muted.
During this break, we're not muted. Okay. Well,
Sorry, we're still on parking.
I don't park in the garage now. Park on the street. Bikes in the garage. With information.
So we have to wait for Dave. Did everyone receive, everyone's seen the saldo draft that we have? Yes. Okay. Did everyone receive the green building and 3D, 5D zoning?
That was me when I got here.
Did I not send it to you? I'm sorry about that.
You can tell me all about it when you get to it.
I'm gonna read it.
Well, sure. You have one for me.
Well, I'm gonna have to borrow them back, or you can keep them out.
Okay.
All right, so let's start by talking about the saldo. Borough staff has asked if we could make a recommendation to Borough Council about the saldo. The Borough staff is interested in having council consider whether or not it is time to advertise this. So I would like to try and see what kind of resolution we could make. I'm going to take the unusual step of starting the conversation by offering a resolution, just putting it out on the table so that we can use that as a starting point. I am trying to figure out where this is. Okay, so what I would propose, what I would propose is that we make a recommendation to council that we approve this saldo revision in its intent with the fine details of the text still to be finalized. I think that our resolution should flag areas for future work after this draft, after this version of the saldo is approved. Those areas of future work would include, I think the traffic impact study section could be refined, Heidi raised the question of whether there should be a historic preservation report required in certain circumstances, and I would propose that we put in our resolution so that it's documented that those would be areas for future work. There may be others. So I guess what I'd like to say is aim towards is a resolution to recommend that council that the saldo of this draft is substantively what we would like to see, pending the final wordsmithing, ironing out of editing things by Chloe and the solicitor. So I'd like to head in that direction, at least as a starting point. So Chloe, I'll turn it over to you. I would love to be able to try and get through this in half an hour, so we can have half an hour to talk about the other two.
Does this allow them to advertise?
Pardon me?
Does this allow council to advertise on?
Council could advertise this notwithstanding what we do.
Okay.
They're asking for our opinion of this at this stage.
Okay.
Council, as you know, can advertise ordinances, even zoning ordinances, without conferring with us. So.
Well, and I think that's a very reasonable thing to offer our council at this point.
So let me ask Chloe to lead us through what you feel we need to be focusing on.
Okay, thanks, Todd. I am going to share my screen because I made some draft revisions even after the last draft I shared with you. Let me just do this. Okay. Let's see what's up here. Okay, so the main item that I left our last meeting feeling really, I wasn't really quite sure what needed to be in the final code content-wise related to sidewalk width and planting strips. That was kind of my top priority, to try a revision of this and bring it back to you and see, are we getting to where we want to go? So, let me explain what this table is trying to do here. So, we look at the 3 streets that are arterial or urban collector first, Haverford, Montgomery, and Wynwood, and then go to all other streets. So we look at Haverford in the 5A district, we're downtown. My first attempt at this, I had a 6-foot sidewalk and a 4-foot planting strip, but then a provision that would allow street furniture, paving, etc. in the planting strip, which is no longer maybe a good name once you get there. A little informal discussion with Todd and Jim, in which we decided, how about we just say the required sidewalk is 10 feet, but areas, right, and if the sidewalk is greater than 5 feet, any area in excess of 5 feet may also include the following in compliance with other standards and regulations. So that's saying the 5A district, you need to have a 10-foot sidewalk, but at least 5 of it must be just sidewalk, and the other 5, it can be sidewalk, but you can include some street trees. You can put a tree pit, put street furniture, put a bench, put a trash can, put a utility pole, pedestrian lighting, bike rack, landscape planters, outdoor dining for a restaurant, public art, things like that, as long as you maintain at least 5 feet as sidewalk. So that's where we are right now with that. Haverford in the 5B district, this barely exists. 5-foot sidewalk, 4-foot planting strip. Haverford everywhere else, 4-foot sidewalk, 3-foot planting strip. So that's Haverford. Montgomery in the 5B district, 8-foot sidewalk, 6-foot planting strip, and the rest of Montgomery Avenue, 5-foot sidewalk, 6-foot planting strip. And then Wynwood, I need the zoning map to understand why we're here, but
It is pretty much north of Sabine, largely. Right. Not even parts south of Sabine.
A 4 or 5 foot sidewalk is required, and then Wynwood Avenue would require a 2-foot planting strip, and Wynwood Road would have the where it's wider, have the 4-foot lighting strip separated.
You have to differentiate between Winwood Avenue and Road, because I think both Avenue and Road have 3D potentially.
Right. So potentially that needs to be adjusted. Okay, well, let's just go
Can
through.
I ask just a clarification?
Yes,
Are we
please.
reviewing, is the purpose of this to review the dimensions of sidewalks? Is that what we're listening to?
Correct, the dimensions of sidewalk, required sidewalk and planting strips, both.
I think the high level on it is, we've been really struggling with, so there's particularly some places in the borough that we want to see, we have a sidewalk and we have that gap between curb and sidewalk. Is there specific areas where we want to be utilizing that space? Are we okay allowing furniture? Is there specific places where we want to utilize that space as furniture or landscaping or?
Use it for what? Sorry?
Landscaping or street furniture or?
Can I ask that question?
Yeah.
Yes.
So if there's an existing condition with 6-foot sidewalk and 2 feet of it is grass or planted, but then adjacent to it is a 6-foot sidewalk with all concrete, if there's a change of ownership, would that person be required, the new sidewalk be put in with the planted strip? Is that the goal?
So just a change in ownership of the property wouldn't invoke the saldo, but if there were redevelopment on the site, then it would have to comply with this table. So if this table said that on that street, on that block, there needed to be a planting strip, then yes, they have
Okay,
to.
so this only applies if there is a major redevelopment, or even a
Anything
minor,
that
any
qualifies
redevelopment.
as a subdivision or land development.
But a change in ownership does require a sidewalk review. I think
If there's cracked sidewalk.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
know a couple of places that you're talking about that.
All around our block.
Yeah,
For
around, but
example.
also on Woodwood Road, there are a couple of places where there's a substantial planting strip, but then some properties have concrete all the way out to the curb.
Right.
It would be nice for a sidewalk review to take into account that, yes, a planting strip is appropriate here, it fits here, and this could be continuous here.
Right, right.
The table is okay as is, and there's a little bit of 3D on Wynwood Avenue, but it's just adjacent to the playground, basically, the park there, and there already is somewhat of a planting strip there, so I think that's fine. And then the rest of North Wynwood Avenue, where it's a little narrower and there's less, it's a little lower traffic volumes, it's all 3A up until basically the corner.
So, just as clarification, though.
Yes.
So it says no street furniture is allowed anyway, right?
Well, so I'm sort of proposing that maybe we don't need that column.
Well, if it isn't allowed nowhere, then you shouldn't have a column because it's never allowed. So you could just say that.
Instead of having this column, I've just stated that in the 5A district, street furniture is allowed in any area of the sidewalk that's in excess of 5 feet.
Yeah, because that's not what it says in the column.
Right, I'm proposing to remove the column. The column was in the draft that I sent you.
see, so that it's Xed out completely. I see, that's what that.
Correct, that's what that means, sorry if that wasn't clear. I'm proposing to take that out, but I wanted to just do it so you can see it.
Yes, understood, thank you.
So Chloe, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Because I'm not real interested in needing this table around anymore. But 3A, Wynwood, that's Wynwood Avenue. I don't understand why that has the smallest planting strip anywhere in the borough outside of our urban areas. It's a street where traffic tends to speed, where most properties already have more than a 2-foot planting strip to begin with. So why wouldn't that just be 4 feet like everywhere else?
Is it wide enough?
That's Wynwood Avenue, where all the houses are set back about a mile.
Well, it varies, but I think this is new development anyway, so.
You're probably more familiar than I, but when I looked along there, it didn't appear that there was a planting strip anywhere existing, so this would.
Oh, there is. I walk there all the time. There's some huge trees in that.
I mean, are we writing in here anywhere that this is subject to existing conditions and review? Because I'm sure there's going to be anomalies that we're going to run into.
For the other streets.
I'm happy to change that to 4. I'd love to do that. If that works for you.
Yeah.
That seems okay, let's do that.
I mean,
Okay, great.
just as information today,
Yes.
there are places with no planting strip on Linwood.
Right, there are areas with no planting strip.
A lot, yeah.
Well,
But there are
that's
areas
mostly
with-
down closer to Windsor.
Yeah, but isn't that still in this zoning district?
No, right at Windsor, there is a substantial planting strip, but north of Sabine, it tapers away somewhat, and then north of, what's the next road? Langdon, I think. North of Langdon, it's completely gone. Or is that Woodwood
It's
Court?
Chestnut, but no, to the east of Chestnut, there's no.
We're talking about two different streets.
North.
Oh, North.
Wood Avenue.
Yeah, I thought you were talking about South Margaret.
No.
I mean, is this a survey task that needs to be performed?
So I started, after the last meeting, I started going block by block through the borough and trying to look every single place. But I couldn't even go block by block, I had to go each side of each block. And there was a very clear pattern, which was, so Haverford, Montgomery, and Wynwood, I think maybe we do need to go block by block. But the rest of the borough, it seems like what's needed in most of the residential areas is to continue the 4-foot sidewalk and continue existing conditions, except if there's no on-street parking and the traffic is right next to the sidewalk and there's no planting strips, to try to improve that condition and by putting in a small buffer area when there's a development scenario. So that's the exact numbers here in some of these, I mean, these special cases are very important, I think. They're maybe the most important. May need to be examined and we might need to look further at some of these, but I think that the pattern here should ensure that if there's moving traffic, if there's no separation next to the sidewalk, to try to improve that for pedestrians.
It's a good start. I mean, you know, I mean, it's like you were saying, they're going to find things that are potential room for discussion when it actually gets developed, I think. And that's why I'm wondering if there's somewhere in this code that says, you know, anything that's outside of this will be reviewed. Yeah, on a case by case basis.
You can't just say like anything.
But I know, but
You
it's
have a standard, I mean, it's the case of Saldo, that is, you're in the waiver territory for a situation where it's a better situation, like, you're gonna end up with a better product.
Yeah.
But at least if you have,
Yeah,
here's what it
that's
is.
what I'm saying, yeah.
Is there-
We could have guidelines that.
Is there any way that someone would interpret this as having license to reduce a planting strip or eliminate it?
Well, that's.
So I just added this back in, which was in my previous thing. So I just asterisk here and fill into the next page, or continue existing conditions if greater. And I think it is good to have that in there.
Yeah, yeah.
There may be some situations in which.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah.
I think that would work.
Similarly, is it a good start to just wholesale delete the column about the street furniture? I mean,
Yes,
what
I
type of
that's what
street
she's
furniture
doing.
are you talking about? Is
Yeah.
this like for a bus stop? Is this like for a park bench? Is this like for a, like what type of furniture? Is it geared more toward public transportation? Like what is the nature of this furniture?
I was thinking more along street trees and landscape planters and benches, like bicycle parking, that kind of thing. But I am proposing to delete this column. It was just in the last draft that I sent you, and I wanted to make sure we
Tom is gone, folks.
Tom's gone.
Okay.
So I just
Tom's
trying to
gone.
understand are we, I'm not sure, we're not really necessarily making decisions, is this just an open discussion? And if the topic, so one quick, I would recommend calling it Wynwood Avenue, it's North Wynwood Avenue, because there's also Wynwood Road in South Narberth, and they both have the same problem, they both have attached sidewalks, and they both have speeding traffic. There's no, I'm looking at the Google Street View, there is no verge as you approach the park. And then,
Up until between Foxhall.
Yeah, and I think so that the question then is like, if, in these places where you have it today without a strip, which isn't that much protection anyway, would you compel the owner to move the sidewalk back from the street for development? And I would think maybe we should just put it in there, like was said, at 4 feet, and you would get an exception if you want to argue that that's not appropriate.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
that's fine, and I think in general, to get at what you were getting at, Heidi, is to make them a little on the high side and make someone make their case for making it smaller.
Yeah.
And if they make a good case and it really works better, you can recommend that waiver.
Right.
Right, so
Yeah.
err on the wider
Maybe they want to
side.
save a mature tree, or they could get a variance if there's some hardship.
It's a waiver.
Well, okay, a waiver.
It's important because a waiver is relatively easy to obtain as opposed to variance.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Who gives a waiver?
Borough Council.
Council just votes to approve the waiver.
Yeah, so waiver's less complicated. So Wynwood Avenue, 4 and 4, I'm not sure where that leaves us at Wynwood Road. Would that be 4 and 4 also?
Well, I thought when 3 Elmwood was up for discussion, we were pushing for more than that. We were pushing for a 6-foot sidewalk and like a 6-foot buffer or something, much more substantial. Now they have the room for it,
As of today, that's still in Marion Township.
Well, but it was being jointly reviewed.
Yeah.
I think it's okay to say what you would like on Wynwood Road, and
That's
it may come into play. I think it's worth having in there what you would ideally want to see.
So would you prefer to leave that at 6 then? Because since that's something that was already discussed in that development application?
I think I agree with Heidi. Why not make it more and then come down
Okay.
if necessary?
That's fine with me. Looking further down Wynwood Road, there are homes and garages close to it.
This has to do with when people are redeveloping.
Okay, so maybe we're going to separate.
I think Wynwood Avenue, 4 feet is fine. Okay, does that give you enough to finish this table?
Yes.
Okay. Chloe, are there other major things you wanted our attention on?
Yes. Let's see. Bicycle parking. So I tried to look for examples of bicycle parking requirements, and there actually are not that many good examples out there. I mean, I'm sure you all codes covered. But it's great to put in a bicycle parking requirement. We had some suggestions about maybe making it a stronger requirement, or requiring more bicycle parking, or including some indoor or covered spaces. So I took an attempt at that. So if any development of any type, this includes residential, non-residential, mixed use, has an initial calculated requirement of at least 5 parking spaces based on Table 7 in the zoning ordinance, prior to any shared parking or parking credit reductions, then 1 bicycle parking space shall be provided for every 5 spaces required or fraction thereof. So let's say, their initial application may say they require 15 spaces, and then they get some shared parking or parking credits, and they actually have to put in less, and they still have to provide, that would be 3 bicycle parking spaces.
Couldn't you just, based on the number of units, if you're doing it on a pre-credit scenario?
Yeah, you could you could have a separate, rather than referring to the vehicle parking table, you could have a separate parking table for bicycle parking that referred to the number of units, the number of square feet of non-residential space, and other things like that. That would be fine if you wanted, if you'd rather do that, we can do that.
So can we just not require parking for bicycles, proportional to the development size? And the proportion should be, what is it? It's like a minimum of 2 spaces per dwelling unit, and a minimum, or a minimum of 1 space per bedroom, whichever is greater. Right, or something along those lines. I mean, a person is more likely to own a bicycle than a car, frankly. So if we're requiring all this parking, then why aren't we just requiring the bicycle parking too?
I'll write whatever you discuss, how much parking you want to require, how you want to configure it, and I will put that in the code. Just tell me what you like.
But I don't think it should be negotiable. Like why are we trading car spaces for bicycle parking?
There's no trading, but it is pegged to that in the way that I wrote it, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they should be providing bicycle parking anyway.
So Lower Marion Township has a standard. I wish I thought to look it up.
It's right here. They have no minimum for fewer than 8 units residential, 0.75 per unit, 8 to 20 units, and 1 per unit for more than 20 units.
I think we should at least meet that standard.
We should exceed the standard.
We could exceed
I
the
just put
standard.
Lower Marion's on the screen. I was thinking about
And it
earlier.
would be nice that if the development has indoor or underground parking for vehicles, it should also include bicycles within the same facility. I mean, the same type of shelter.
And actually, that man requires all long-term bicycle parking to be enclosed.
No, that's good.
They differentiate between short-term, which is like the outside bike rack
Racks
for
outside.
the delivery person, and long-term, which is for the resident or employee.
It's like the visitor versus the resident.
That's a good, I mean, I think probably Lower Marion's rules are pretty good. Maybe just make the jack the minimums up a little bit.
So at the train station, would bicycle parking be long-term and therefore be enclosed?
No, I mean, you could have bicycle lockers or
Well, I mean,
whatever,
people
but
who ride their bike to get to the train and are gone all day at work and then return and get their bike and go home.
Are they
We're
subject
talking
to?
about development proposals, not
Not
public regulations.
Oh, yeah, no, sorry.
So maybe
Sorry.
we could just
I was
up the
thinking of
Lower
the train
Marion
station.
one, just to
Exactly.
get rid of the first line with no minimum. I mean, maybe it's just like 1 per unit.
1 per unit
Yeah.
for above 5 units or whatever.
Yeah,
1 per unit above how many?
Well, I don't see
5?
why for multifamily residential or multiple family dwellings, it should be one per unit. no matter
1 per
what.
unit,
What's the
period.
problem with providing bike parking?
Yeah,
So for any
for any, yeah.
multi-unit
Any
development,
apartment building or multiple family house. should
You
have
have
one
5
unit.
families, 5 bike
Should
spaces.
3 or above then.
honestly, you probably need more. I mean, you may not need
You
one for
may
every
need more,
person,
but it's a minimum, I mean.
I guess. But see what happened, so if you go down the landing, I think they had to do like retrofits and stuff. Anyway, you end up with too many bicycles, it could be an issue, but all right.
Do you remember when we were?
Wait. Let's, so Adam, you're talking about the landing. Right now, we're talking about multifamily residential. So
Next to the landing, there is a giant apartment building that's raised out of the floodplain above the parking, and there's secure parking for bicycles in the parking garage. The question is, are there enough racks to meet the number of bicycles that park? Otherwise,
in the apartment building?
in the apartment
So you
building next
see
to the
bikes
landing.
just hanging out? Is that what you're saying? It looks
They had to, we don't need, I think they had to put in different racks. The original racks didn't work properly, and there's a question of like, people, if they, yes, they may not quite have enough.
Folks, we cannot argue about this all night. Clay, we need you to bring us better recommendations. I think what you're hearing right now is Lower Marion should be a minimum. I can't believe
You want
there
something
are.
like Lower Marion's table, but a little higher requirement.
Yeah, but
Starting
I
at a
can't
smaller
believe
number of units.
there's
Fine,
not
that
some
sounds great.
transit-oriented
Can
areas
I
out
just
there.
throw one thing in there, and that is LEED does have, for green building, they do have a bicycle storage category. And, you know, it's all spelled out here. Should I?
Sure, I'll look into that.
Is it codified?
Can I also throw out there that many codes and design guidelines will have standard drawing specs as well? Because very often people install the wrong bike rack in the wrong location and it's functionally not usable. So I think there is probably material you can crib.
So there's a professional organization called the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals, and they have a guidebook that's published about how to install bicycle parking. What I have in the draft refers to that guidebook. If you're comfortable with that, we can just go with that. Or if you'd rather, we can put in some specs directly in the code.
I think for the time being, we can start with that.
Yeah, I think it sounds good. Go for it. Definitely.
But what I was going to say, there might be transit-oriented or more bicycle-friendly parts of the world where you can get a better sense of what a higher level of requirement might be. Like,
I mean, it's
Davis,
a big deal. If
California.
you go to any city, Vancouver.
Yeah. I like the differentiation between short-term and long-term. Like, Lower Marion does have some parking configuration, guidance. Adam's suggesting as much of that as possible. So if there's a reference like you're suggesting, that's good.
Because if you're a family of 4, you may only own 1 car, but you might have 4 bicycles. Just throwing that out there.
Great, so we're landing like 1 per unit.
Yep.
No, we're not. We're asking you to look at transit-oriented, bicycle-friendly communities. 1 per unit is Lower Marion.
No, but
No, they're 0.75.
Okay,
Or
well,
less.
that's
Going up.
for 20 units. Like, places that really are biking communities and see what their standards are.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be in Pennsylvania, because it won't be in Pennsylvania.
No, it's not in Pennsylvania. I did look at a lot of code today.
It'll be like Madison, Wisconsin, or
Okay.
Austin, Texas, or Portland, or any place in Washington State, or Davis, California. There are places that are just gung-ho for bikes. See if there's better ideas. I think everyone's saying one is not enough. And I also think Adam is right about the landing. That whole area is woefully under-resourced in terms of bike racks. So, thinking about commercial and mixed-use development and what good standards are for visitor bike parking. Lower Marions are pathetically low. I mean, it's incredible, that area. He's right. Everything is telling us that we need more of it. So.
Are you talking about the APBP?
Yes.
Yeah. Boy, they have a whole
Are there any other?
programming.
I'll tell you all about it. Exterior pedestrian scale lighting. The draft that I shared with you required this pedestrian scale lighting only along urban collectors and arterials, which is just Haverford, Wynwood, and Montgomery. And I had suggested 60 feet based on a couple of other codes, and I looked at your existing lighting along Haverford, and it looks like it's between 50 and 60 feet, most of it.
50 and 60 feet, what?
Between the pedestrian
between
lights.
fixtures.
And I did, I measured in a couple other communities, and they're not exactly precisely spaced, and I think that's because they're accommodating, street trees and benches and intersections, and so it isn't that it's precise. So we might want to.
Well, that depends on the height of the pole, doesn't it?
was looking at the downtown district, they were just trying to measure them all down there. They were coming out between 45 and 65 feet.
45 and 65, okay. So I took a look at this. There was a request to consider a smaller distance between them. So,
Everywhere?
well, that's a good question. Are we talking primarily about the commercial districts? Do we want them closer together there?
Yes,
We want
so
them Go ahead.
the typical approach would be to have it based on the intended illumination more than the spacing, but just for the 2-block downtown area, that's where you would want high levels of light for safety and commerce and so on. And I would argue in the neighborhoods, we should be going for the absolute minimum in lighting. And there, intersections are particularly important where people have to cross the road and whatever other safety concerns are. But, so I think, I would focus on an illumination standard on the pavement in the commercial areas and on the arterials, not, I don't know. I mean, so the spacing should be really, it's not everywhere, it's just on the arterials and the collectors, right?
Right, so the section B here just says that street lights, which are generally taller, shall be installed at all intersections and other spots as necessary by Borough Council.
Should it be Borough Council or the Borough Engineer? Or should it be both? Anyway.
So that was my comment about increasing frequency of pedestrian lighting. And I don't know that I'm fully informed about the distinction between the street lighting and the pedestrian lighting, but I am definitely informed about the difference between needing light to drive a car with 2 headlights and walking down Montgomery, Haverford, Wynwood, what have you, when it's dark out, and knowing that there is a lack of pedestrian lighting. Whether you're walking your dog, riding your bike, on the sidewalk, whatever the case. And so the thought was, maybe this is something that needs to be sort of investigated a little bit, just to figure out, is the lighting adequate? I can tell you that, okay, I'm not the majority, but I do go running on Montgomery at night and it's dark, except for car headlights and a few streetlights. When we were reviewing 701 Montgomery, where Albrecht's used to be, I think part of what the argument was for scale was, you want to draw people out from the neighborhoods to come out into, those ground floor retail spaces and use them, or the restaurant and use it, or the gym and use it, or whatever it was, to encourage more pedestrian flow and stimulate that economy and get people moving and get people out of their cars and multimodal thinking. And I think it's an opportunity to really, think about how we articulate scale at the pedestrian level or the bicycle level or whatever it is outside of the standards that we implement for vehicular traffic.
Just ask, as you're talking about walking around, if you're in the downtown district on like Haverford or Windsor or Essex or on that, how do you feel about that?
I think it's adequate. I think it's good. It's charming.
So if we were
it
at a
has a particular
basis,
charm.
if we were at it just setting like a particular number right now, if that spacing, if that would be found adequate, I think that was averaging out somewhere around the 60 feet, which I think is what we have now.
Yeah. In downtown Norwood, 60. Okay.
About 55, 60 on average.
Okay. But it's also, tailored to that scale.
It's pedestrian scale. So part of the reason to require those pedestrian scale lampposts in downtown commercial districts is aesthetic, not just lighting.
Right.
Like it gives the sense of a small town Main Street. And so you may want to require that along the commercial district along Montgomery to try to get towards that, you know, in a redevelopment scenario to require some smaller, attractive pedestrian scale lampposts gives you a sense of that commercial district as well.
I think actually if you bring them down, you have to increase the spacing, or shorten the spacing between them.
And I would also add to what Adam was saying about lighting in the neighborhoods not needing to be so frequent. I would also argue against the, you know, safety floodlight factor, where we're putting in, we're replacing incandescents with LEDs, but those LEDs are blue and they're bright, and they're not neighborhoody. They're interrogation lights.
They're a disaster, except from the economics of dollars per lumen, or whatever the measurement is. But other than that, they're a disaster. I can read the newspaper in my front yard now at midnight.
Yeah. So I agree. That's why this draft code doesn't say anything about, you know, pedestrian lighting every 60 feet on any street other than it's just Haverford, Windward, and Montgomery. So it sounds like everyone's okay with that.
But as long as there's a distinction between the street.
Right.
Between a street light and pedestrian light. Yeah, so actually the zoning code has a requirement that in the long term, I would propose moving to the salvo, that states how high the pedestrian scale lighting is limited to. So it's got to be limited to a certain rate. In fact, but that's actually spelled out in the zoning code right now.
So Chloe, can you tell me what section the salvo this is all in?
Yes, in the salvo we are in section 450-52, exterior lighting. And in the zoning it's 500-603, lighting. Right, so this says, for the lighting of pedestrian areas, luminaires shall not be mounted in excess of 14 feet above finished grade of the surface. And then it talks about illumination at the tract boundary, but that's different from what we're talking here about street lighting.
So maybe I would just consider having pedestrian lighting and vehicular lighting, you know, like,
yes, yeah,
whatever the technical term.
Street lights.
Yeah. But street is a little ambiguous because pedestrians are on streets. So maybe like, you know.
I'm gonna have to, I just don't think we can spend all night debating this. And I'm particularly wound up because I know there's tons of good research on this. There are beautiful streets out there. We could argue about this till midnight and we would not get to the right answer. I think we need we know we have certain kinds of streets that we'd like to have certain kinds of qualities. We have, you know, our downtown streets, we have Montgomery Avenue, we have our residential streets. And I just don't think we don't need to invent it. There are standards out there that can be found, that can produce the kind of lighting you'd like for our streets. And it's not going to happen around this table. So, Chloe, I'm sorry to say this, but I think if there's something that we could have in the Salvo now that won't create damage, that's great. But I think, and I'm saying this because, you know, there are people who care deeply about this and have studied it, you know, and know how to create lighting standards for great streets. And that work is out there, and we should find it. I mean, I was just reading Project for Public Spaces, their page on street lighting, you know, and that's not even, they're not even experts in lighting. It's just like an aggregator group. So I'm afraid, Clay, that this isn't going to be something we can resolve in this draft. And I'd just like to suggest that whatever goes into this draft and Salvo, just simply to make these better, great, but it's something that I think we need to return to, maybe take that back. You know, it's incredibly frustrating because it's the same as true as street furniture, and I mean, the answers are out there about how to design streets and sidewalks and planting strips and things. I mean, I swum in this stuff when I was in graduate school, you know? And I don't know why it's so hard to find it, actually. And so I kind of feel like we need better stuff brought to us. This isn't a participatory exercise. What's the right distance between streetlights? I think it's a task of finding great examples out there and showing us. Here's a street. Here's a street with 13-foot streetlights, 40-foot on center. You know, is this the kind of street you're envisioning? Here's a residential street with carriage lights versus, I mean, and it shouldn't be something that we have to sit here and invent. Sorry, but it's.
Let's move on.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to bring up? Because I also feel like it's important to know, there are a lot of definition questions that I raised.
Right, well, the last one that I thought was really important to discuss tonight was about the minor plan. And that is a definition that Maggie had rewritten that I carried into this draft. She had already, so I didn't know, because that was before I was working with the borough, if that had already been discussed with you. It sounds like from what your comment was, Todd, that maybe it had not been. So I wanted to make sure, you know, that's a policy question about whether you want to consider a 2-lot subdivision a minor plan and allow concurrent preliminary final plan submission or not.
So do you all get that question? In this, there's language that if correct me if I'm wrong, if you, a single lot that's being subdivided into 2 lots, which now is a land development approval, will become a minor plan submission. And I guess what you're saying is the preliminary and final plan review could be consolidated. So it's just one review. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Would that be only for subdivision, or would that include a situation where land development was being proposed as well?
No, it was only for subdivision.
So if it were being subdivided and land development were occurring, it would go through the process. But what would happen is they would just subdivide it, and then you'd come back 3 months later and just submit permits to build on each lot.
Well, so there's in subdivision land development, there's nothing stopping an applicant from subdividing a property and you can create legally conforming properties, and then you can build one house on one lot without land development. That's a situation that exists in any condition, right?
So if you sold all the lots off, and they could each be developed one by one, or how does?
So even in any land development application, someone can come in and subdivide a property to create more lots, and you don't actually have to show what the development on that property. You just can get the subdivision plan, and then you develop a property through a creating permit application, which is just an administrative procedure. This minor plan language basically just takes the plans, which are simple. I think it's describing it as not more than 2 lots, fronting an existing street, not creating any new streets or public improvements, and that's not going to adversely affect other properties. So it's really a situation of a 100-foot lot being split to 50-foot lots type of scenario. And it just streamlines that review process for that small plan. That's the gist of what that language is.
I think the way this is written actually does not intend to allow that, but that it's not clear from this first part. So we can definitely leave it as just a minor plan. It's just a lot line adjustment, not a new lot line.
That's what the current language
Current language is, or a simple conveyance is basically like another version of a lot line adjustment, where a piece of one lot is going to be conveyed to the owner of a neighboring comply. I think that requires adjustment of this first sentence.
Okay. So that's not the intention.
I don't believe so.
Okay. All right. So Chloe, what do you think, I know you talked to the staff more, what do you think the goal, the kind of path forward is? Council meets in a week and a half.
And I'd be happy to hear from Michelle if she wants to share
Michelle, you still there?
what she thinks makes sense from here.
Yeah, I think I spoke with Samantha this morning, and I think the desire is still to bring it forward to council at the July meeting. And then any kind of revisions, I know the traffic study and the historical study kind of get discussed at a later time.
But Michelle, we're also talking about issues like lighting, bicycle parking, still are in kind of needing further research. What are your thoughts about how we proceed with those things up in the air?
The technical questions such as those, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, as far as, Eric, Chloe, and Kevin and the Planning Commission's recommendations on if it's acceptable to move forward, or am I hearing that there's a lot more back work to be done on those?
So those are some substantive issues, and I think the goal would be to kind of see if they can be compartmentalized and worked on later. Honestly, what concerns me more is some of the notes I sent over earlier that have to do with clarifying definitions and definitions that are overlong and need to be moved into the text. Carefully reading it to make sure that and which are used right in Oxford. I mean, there's just a lot of language tightening that needs to occur. And I think in code writing, that's really important to be precise, right? In a way, that concerns me more even than some of these urban design issues, which just might need to be worked out and could be worked out at a later date.
Are you suggesting that we don't, should we go ahead and still present to council with the thought that there are some areas still need to be discussed? And then that discussion is had in August, not at the Planning Commission, but kind of the research done, and then come back to council in September after the Planning Commission meets again?
I guess what I'm suggesting is whatever part of this council and staff are eager to act on should be edited and read as tightly and precisely as possible. Because I don't think it is entirely there yet, just from a code writing point of view. I think there are issues like lighting, bicycle parking, some of the reports and studies that may just, they're topics that require further research and would obviously have to be finalized at some future date. But the important parts of the saldo are the procedural sections, definitions. Probably parking is more important than lighting. Those are the things we really rely on a lot. Whatever it is that is very urgent to get approved, I think what I'm saying is that needs to be nailed down, tightened down, so that there's no ambiguity in the code. Like, for example, the code I was given had 2 definitions of park in it, and they were different. That's just the kind of stuff that needs to be read through and it needs to be ironed out.
What is the need for, what is the urgency? Michelle, do you know what the urgency is?
I believe council is ready to just fix some parts of the Shadow Code that have been lingering on, and the sooner the better.
Is there any reason why we couldn't have placeholders, knowing that they're not final?
placeholders intended to be resolved by
Yeah,
September.
by September, yeah.
I wonder if there's a strategy behind the urgency. I don't know what that would be.
Well,
But
it
a code like this is
lingering on.
constantly evolving. I mean, I don't have to tell those of you that write them all the
Well, that's
time.
a good point too, I mean,
It's never gonna be over. It's
Yeah.
just, what is good enough for now? And I don't have a yardstick to
yeah.
measure that.
Well, it sounds like from what Todd's saying, it's urgent to get this out there with some things missing. Just because we need to get it out there.
Well, is it fair to say that the work that everybody has done over the last couple of years is gotten into a point where it's 99% covers the basis, or are we at 75% cover the
I
basis?
think structurally, it's more like 99%, and then there are a number of issues that need to be
Sure, but there
resolved.
always will be, Chloe.
Right.
It'll never be 100.
Yeah, like for example, your existing code doesn't require any bicycle parking at all.
Right, but that's, in the global scheme of life, that is minor.
Yeah.
It's minor, and we can fix it.
Right.
And it will be planning commissions long after we are gone that will be still wrestling with some of these things, and new things will come up in the interim.
So to be clear, what I'm suggesting is there are things like bicycle parking and lighting and traffic studies and historic preservation studies that can all be dealt with later.
Right.
Just whatever's in there now just shouldn't do damage.
But
Should be done.
later meaning in this draft that we recommend.
No, in September.
Because if we wait, that will take a year.
Yeah.
But if we're asking council to look at anything and consider it, it needs to be written tightly as code. You cannot have two definitions for park that are different. You know, like I said, the bats and witches have to be checked because they're used and I don't always think they're used appropriately. And there's a lot of just nut tightening. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. But
even if you're to say all the stuff that requires more substantive work we just put off and do later, we're going to go with the process, the procedures, the definitions.
So how does this happen?
That's my question. How does this happen, Michelle? How does this happen, Chloe? I mean, how does that?
Editing.
Yeah, because I feel like, I read it for 2 hours on Sunday and I got through 40 pages and I cannot spend my time reading the Saldo over and over. I'm frustrated. I shouldn't be getting a copy of the code that has two definitions of park in it that are different.
I agree with the process of iteration there. Like you invest your time in it, and then you come back to it. If you're rereading it from scratch, that's just not going to be efficient. Every time to read through it every time. So.
But also, as we put green points forward, which is next on the agenda, I believe, as we put that forward, we do need to coordinate. Like, we can't have no bicycle parking while we try to put forward a green point system to revitalize the sustainability facet of the borough. You know, it does need to be coordinated.
I agree with that. It needs to be in the Saldo, but I'm not sure that it needs to be in there tomorrow, because we're not ready to put it in there tomorrow. But can we fix the things that Todd's worried about and get something to council, knowing that there are placeholders that we can tell council about?
So how does that happen? Is the action that we're supposed to be aiming for here is to move for a resolution to recommend that a particular draft be approved by council?
So my original resolution was to say, in general, in terms of the big moves, we support the
intent.
The intent of this Saldo. That there are certain areas that need further work after this draft is complete. Those started out being traffic impact studies, historic preservation impact study, could include further looking at light standards. I think there should be something about bicycles in, no matter what it is, and then we can look at it more later.
Green building standards.
coordination with green building, all that gets worked out later. In that, so we recommend that the intent is there, we approve of the changes in procedure and process and submission requirements, and all that stuff we worked on. In that, there's certain things we feel should be worked on after this is approved, in that we feel that the final language still needs to be, the language needs to be finalized in ordinance language,
Right.
in code language.
So we're at 99%, so
Yeah.
let's
That's what I think.
nail it
So we're
down.
not reading through it all again. I mean, and we know where these sections are going to go. I mean, that's the other important thing. That's why I'm saying placeholders.
But so, and all those other aspects you're just talking about are the technical, like the design standards. I think the most important part right now is the procedure and the definition, because it leads in the procedure. So, an editing of the definitions and advancing the procedures, I think, are the.
If we can get that language nailed down, then it's fine, right? I just think the language needs some rigor.
So I have written down, we approve the intent of this saldo, certain sections, or maybe I should say components, need further revision or refinement, including traffic impact studies, green building standards, bicycle parking and lighting standards. Anything else you want to mention?
Traffic, historic preservation study. That's
Historic and environmental impact studies.
something Heidi has suggested we look at.
Anything else? Okay. And, all right, so we've approved the intent of this saldo. Certain components need further revision or refinement, including traffic impact studies, green building standards, bicycle parking, lighting standards, and historic and environmental impact studies. We recommend that the language be reviewed to improve its precision as a legal code. The most important components are the procedures and the definitions.
At this time.
At this time.
Right.
So that's what we want to recommend to the council, right?
I think
I
so.
think so.
Okay.
I think that makes sense. I mean, there's always a lot of questions about these other subjects.
Okay. So, I guess we'll have to vote on that. Who is in favor of submitting that resolution? Any opposed? Okay. Chloe, I apologize. This is a lot of hard work. I had the privilege in graduate school of hanging out with professors who would study the proper spacing and lighting standards as if tenure depended on it.
And it did. Tenure did depend on it.
And that was a rarefied role, that was. But I do think there are good answers out there if we give ourselves time to find them.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. And I'm happy to work on, I mean, I think bicycle parking requirements is an interesting one. And, you know, like, for example, if we decided we wanted to talk about that in September, the opportunity to focus on, you know, putting together a memo with focused on bicycle parking requirements, that could be
You know, I'm sure
interesting.
the cycling club has opinions on this.
They probably do.
And they put a very
So it's 10 o'clock and we're going to go on from the side. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
I would like to beg your indulgence to describe what I sent you and see if I can get your permission to present to council. We've been asked by council and by the public to think about incorporating green building bonus standards. Jen and I have had many conversations, we've read many documents, and this memo I sent you summarizes thinking to date. And what I'd like to do is sort of consolidate this thinking, find out if it's on the right track, get council's endorsement so that we can actually work on code or administrative things that we would need to implement. What I gave you has a couple of basic ideas. It talks about, so this is, the idea here is that people will be given certain kind of zoning privileges or additional building privileges if they incorporate green building practices. So the first part of this talks about what the base zoning would be. In some cases, it would roll some of that zoning back. So like in the 5A district in Windsor Avenue, instead of 4 buildings, it would roll it back to 3 stories. 4 stories to 3 stories. For residential districts, it would roll the 115% facade provision back to 100%. And you could only get up to those levels if you included green building practices in your project.
I think you meant to say 45 feet to 30.
Yes, yeah, you're right. So that's the first thing it outlines. What would the bonus be? Generally, a little more height, but nothing more than we've tended to allow, because we would reduce some of the bases. And then secondly, what would the bonus require? And there was a long bullet list of things that we could consider requiring and managing through a point system like they have in Doylestown or Swarthmore. So the first thing is, here's the bonus you get, here's what you have to do, a point system that would sort of look at things like alternative energy, energy efficient appliances, sustainable building materials, recycling of waste construction. There's a list of about 8 or 9 things. Generally performative, not specific technologies. And then the bonus would be administered as an applicant, if they come before us, would have at the preliminary plan phase to say, even at this phase, tentative really, we're going to use this bonus. And then at the final phase, they have to provide documentation of how they would implement that bonus. So their plans have to include it. The enforcement of that would occur through the construction inspection and the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. So the applicants, I skipped a step, is that the applicant would have to submit the documentation as part of the final plan. The borough would hire a professional reviewer, a certified architect or an engineer who is certified in some way to review drawings for green construction at the cost of the applicant. That review would be included with the engineer's review, with the borough zoning officer's review, and so forth, as part of the package that moves forward. So I'm sorry I'm not kind of going through it logically, but that would be the process. And then question came up, which we would really just have to look at, which is, how in the long run would this be enforced? Which is 10 years from now, if someone took out the green building features, what would happen to the bonus they were given? So I think there's some long-term enforcement questions that we would have to talk to the solicitor about. And then finally, Jen and I have had extensive conversations, and we received some guidance from the Environmental Advisory Council about situations where someone might want to install some kind of green building feature, let's say solar panels, that are not compliant with the code, the roof rules and things like that. And, I thought about it, and Jen sent me this model energy code that was like 1 million pages long, and it had guidelines for every conceivable thing.
Like setbacks for geothermal and roof line for solar and just everything.
And I thought if we can't even come to an easy answer about bike parking, we're never going to do that. So I think the better route, plus the technology changes even faster than anything.
Right.
So what I'm proposing here to avoid these conflicts is simply to say we would write a special exception that could be awarded to anybody who's installing green, sustainable technology and has a conflict with the code. They just apply for a special exception. They would have to demonstrate that they are doing something which is recognized somewhere as one of the things we want them to do, like alternative energy or something like that. The relief is the least possible relief necessary, won't have an adverse impact, and that it will be a permanent improvement. And then they can just get a special exception. If the solar panel is too high, rather than spending a month rewriting our code, if the geothermal unit is in the setback and it shouldn't be, they can just go for a special exception. We're not going to rewrite our whole zoning code to imagine every possible, because we never will. We just never will. We'll never do that. And so,
The one question that did come up was with Energy Star, in order to achieve the Energy Star rating, you have to improve by 75% the energy performance, but they review that after a year of use. Is there any way of evaluating on a prorated basis improvement?
okay, let's just add that to the list of things we'll consider, because
Okay.
we're not working out the details
I
right
was just wondering, I was just
now. I know, but
really
it's,
wanting to ask.
what I'm looking for right now is there are a million little details to work out, like how's it enforced? But what I'm looking for is sort of a sense of whether this is on the right track, that we provide a bonus, extra development, generally by kind of rolling back certain development and giving it back to the new green building standards, defining green building approaches we want, giving them points, hiring, and then reviewing that through the development review process and hiring a consulting administrator to review those parts of the applications and have that as part of the documentation of the project.
The piece that was left out, if I don't have it in front of me to look, but, and to me, in my experience of working on some LEED projects, is that the most intensive and the most problematic part of the whole process is the post-construction commission, where you need somebody who almost literally looks at every piece of paper that existed through the course of a project and then goes into the building to verify that those things are actually done. And that's after construction. And it's an incredibly difficult, expensive, and I thought when I had to go through it, an intensely, insanely complicated process, which I frankly see don't happening in the borough of Narberth in any meaningful way. I'm afraid that I'm a little cynical about this.
Isn't that like, it's like a punch list, right?
Well.
Okay, so here's how
a punch list on
here's how I
steroids.
propose to resolve that. Doylestown and Swarthmore already have this system in place. They do not give zoning bonuses, but they give reductions in fees if you do this. They have the system in place. So Dave, you may be right. I can even number of reasons why this might not make sense. So what I'm saying is what I'm looking for is whether this is a good path to explore to the next level. And so what we would do in this case is we just call people in Doylestown and Swarthmore. What's it like to administer this? What does it take? How do you do it without costing $30,000 a project? You know what I mean?
Well, can we step back and look at 20,000 feet? I mean, we're really talking about major development projects, I assume. I mean, this doesn't really, this really doesn't pertain to a single-family house in any meaningful way, does it?
No, this is, it's for example, in the commercial district, it's saying, right now we permit, what was it, 45 feet?
25. Well, 25 in most.
No, I'm not talking about the
Montgomery
benefits, I'm
Avenue?
talking about the process.
Yeah, but on any building, it's gonna bring down by 1 story, the zoning on Montgomery Avenue, right? And to get that story back, you're gonna have to put in all these,
Right.
green, building techniques.
Right.
Essentially, that's right, but
It could also, Dave, apply to a house, like a single-family house.
Well, but again, I go back, again, in my experience, the complication that
Okay,
this.
Dave, I've answered that. I'm sorry. You don't have to go back because I answered it.
But
We acknowledge it can be complicated. Let's ask people who are doing this what their experience has been.
So what question is before us this evening?
Well, I mean, it's useful, Dave, for you to bring the point up, but I think it's been answered. You know, if it's a concern about how this will be administered, we will go to municipalities that are actually administering something like this and find out how it works. They might say, no, it's a pain in the ass. It's not worth it. Don't do it.
Are we
Okay,
making,
no,
so are we assigning someone to call Swarthmore and Doylestown?
Not tonight, no. What we're looking for right now is that, I mean, I think there's huge enforcement questions. I sent this to Borough Council, and I already got 2 questions about that. So those questions are good ones. I think what I'm looking for is, do you think this, we've been asked by council to make a proposal about how to develop this system. And I guess the question is, do you think this is a way to kind of create a framework that we can investigate and find out whether or not it really works?
Sure, you can look into this.
Can I just make some various comments? Okay, I don't see the question of natural gas hookups in here anywhere. I think that's something we ought to consider, like, have no new natural gas hookups being
Jim, that's not on the table tonight.
Oh, those are things we could add in what the bonus requires.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't what's on the table tonight, are we interested in pursuing this general question?
Right.
Well, and
It's
also,
basically a 4-point idea.
Yeah.
A bonus for extra construction in these circumstances, a list of things the bonus requires, which we could add that to, an administrative procedure, which is outlined, and a special exception process to avoid conflicts between green building and the code.
I see a problem with the bonus system, and you can allude to that you give people the bonus to build 45 feet instead of 35, and then the building craps out environmentally for some reason or another, the system or whatever. I don't know if it's a good, I mean, you're talking about a pretty massive change to the building shape and height, and
What do you mean by crap out?
But if you're giving them points because they put in a very environmentally good HVAC system, and then in 5 years, it's obsolete.
Not even in 5 years, it
Yeah.
doesn't perform.
I think it's a bad standard. Yeah, I think it's a bad standard.
I mean, we got a single-family house at 500 Dudley where there were real questions. Yeah, are we really is the borough going to require that this guy do something drastic to it? And now you're talking about an extra story on a multi-story building.
I think it's not a great system. I think there ought to be a better incentive system in place than increasing massing on a project.
We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater here. And the baby in this question, in this context, is the work that this planning commission has done over the last 15 years. So in the case of the house that gets the extra story, that is throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Well,
I'm going to vote against.
Well, what he's actually done is he's taken that away unless you do this, which is a kind of.
It's not clear to me, and we're not going to resolve it at 10 p.m.
The 4 points were the bonus amount, the list of items required to get the bonus. What was the third one?
Administrative procedure and a special exception.
Administrative procedure.
And I'd like to add one more thing to your list, what the bonus requires, considerations for adaptive reuse also of existing buildings.
Well,
can I ask a general question that's related to what happens to these standards when in the future, if and when they become the baseline, rather than the aspirational standards? Then we're handing out bonuses for things that happen anyway. Do we update these standards?
They would have to be revised.
I think
I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, as it is we've made reference to this in the past, current building standards are pretty good in this area.
Yeah.
I mean, when we talk about Energy Star and all these other things, most of, not a lot of this stuff has been incorporated into basic building and HVAC codes.
Yeah.
Could we, I'm sorry if this is way off, but just tell me if it's way off. Could we instead have a standard that says it's upon the applicant to demonstrate that they are exceeding the current standard by a certain percentage?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
actually,
Yes.
especially for something like stormwater management. I mean, Dave, obviously one of the things we have to do is figure out which of these things we would be giving credit for that are not already expected.
So I would be curious to see you said Swarthmore and what other? And Dawson, I'd like to see what they've done.
They use it just to reduce building permit fees. Jim, I encourage you to look at the part I wrote about what the bonus would provide, because it's really not giving anything that the form-based code doesn't already give. You know, it's basically saying, for example, in the 5B district, we allow 45-foot building right now on Windsor Avenue. We would reduce that to 35 feet and then allow people to do 45 feet if they meet this code. So it's not giving anything more than it's given that. So I think you should just read it. In terms of the enforceability, look, I was a planner in New York for more than a decade, and I saw plenty of cases where developers got a bonus. It was the big lesson of 1961. The minute you give a bonus, they'll take it and run. And you know, we fought for years about developers who got bonuses for public space and then never made it accessible. These things are up there. I don't go into this with any illusion. We've been asked to look at it. If we find out that it's just not practical or beyond our capacity, because then so be it.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm kind of tired of being asked by people to look at this, and so I think we should just look at it.
And, you know, change is hard, and we have a lot of work to do yet to, you know, work through these, you know, figuring out how to make it effective. But overall, like, in the big picture, it's, again, it would be an improvement. It would be for the better.
All right.
Just one more.
I will tell council, with your permission, that the planning commission has reviewed this and is very wary of this whole proposition. They
Well, there may
feel
be
like
another way
it's
to
a lot of pain and not a lot of gain.
Well, this is
But
like,
we will look at it.
this is like we're saying, well, we're not gonna do LEED, so we have to come up with something original.
No, I think what we're saying is that it's worth looking into this.
We want people to do the right thing. We basically,
Sure, it's worth
we want
looking
to
into this.
inspire developers and builders.
But we're not going to resolve the details of it this evening, and nor should we try.
But it's good to flag the problems, and not as a reason not to look at this, I think, but just to kind of identify the things we need to make sure we can answer. Believe me, I don't always know that the answer will be yes. How do you enforce this over the next 5, 10, 20 years is a big problem.
I wonder what the
We need to ask the solicitor about that. Like, what, I mean, really, what are the options for enforcing something that has to be forever?
We keep the planning commission on the website.
Jim, if you don't mind, I just like, so the other thing is really important to get your feedback on are these zoning proposals for 5B. Again, it's just like a white paper. It's a series of issues that the development at 714 Montgomery has raised. I point out some gaps in our code with suggestion about what we might look at. So essentially what I'm proposing here, and this again, like the infill development, is to sort of react to the impact of the historic district on what people can do with their properties. So what I'm suggesting is we look at whether or not it would be reasonable to look at apartment buildings as an allowable building type in the 5B zone, whether or not we would allow for 4 stories of construction within the allowable 45 feet of the 5B zone. Again, this is for developments that preserve historic property. That we clarify mixed-use buildings must include a vertical mix of buildings, and that we develop parking design standards for underground parking, which we do not really have, and we certainly don't have them for this district. There's not really much in terms of how to do that here. It's just like these are topics that I think we need to look at in order to be able to manage this kind of development at 714 Montgomery Avenue. So I guess what I'm looking for again is, does this seem like a reasonable set of zoning changes to explore further?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's feasible, the workload, you think, to make all of these changes? Or
I'm not
should we
sure.
prioritize some of them?
I will ask council for their opinion about what to prioritize, because a lot of this is coming from council.
This seems to stand on top of the green building bonuses we were just talking about.
I don't know, we'll ask council for that.
Oh my God.
Okay. If
So,
you have,
if this is mostly pertaining though to the property at the Price House, I think that's a big topic. Because it's not just it's fraught with so many issues, putting a big building.
what do you mean?
Well, I mean, just 2 quick points. 45 feet on Montgomery is really tall. The Royal Bank is 40. So that in itself is not in sync with the construction of Montgomery Avenue, even though it's the appropriate place to have taller buildings, perhaps. And then to say that the Price House sits on a property that should allow a 45-foot building behind it is also not in keeping with the essence of the code, because it's basically putting the 45-foot structure in the residential neighborhood, not on Montgomery Avenue. And it would totally dwarf the Price House, and it's totally inappropriate. So I think we really need to think hard about, first of all, I don't know why they would need 4 stories, and 45 feet is too tall. I almost did a diagram and brought it with me, but
Actually, just to clarify, I think the existing code is 3 stories.
and 45, and
Which is strange.
that should not be allowed on this property, where the address really should be Meeting House, not Montgomery. I mean, there should be no driveway. I saw the plan that they submitted is pretty inappropriate.
Can I just suggest, I think personally that this height limit, if the issue is compatibility, there should be like a step down clause. So you don't have to change, if you want to allow 45 feet along Montgomery, but then you just have it say, but where your parcel touches a lower zoning class, you must step down within 30 feet.
That would help, yes. That's a good solution.
What's driving us though, 714?
Yeah, but nothing we do here is going to affect the review of 714.
It's already been done.
This is months and months away. And that's happening now in real time.
So what is?
So it's the impetus that made us think about it, but it's not going to
But I still think
affect that
it's a
development.
special lot. I mean, I think when we designated 5B, I mean, that didn't mean that you could infill a 45-foot high structure behind
Well, actually,
an existing Montgomery Avenue address.
actually, the way it is now, you could build a 45-foot mixed-use building there.
I understand that it's not well defined in our code.
You were saying
Well,
you're
it is well
expecting a
defined.
rear
It's
yard of
got a White
35
House
feet deep.
behind it. But right now, you could build a 45-foot building there, that's a mixed-use building, that has 3 stories of bigger. That's allowable now.
But not within 35 feet of the rear lot line was the idea that we were stressing last time.
25 feet.
25 feet, okay, so.
Right.
Which is an entire house lot.
Right. Right, so that could be something we could consider, you know, in terms of thinking about this, but I guess what I'm suggesting is that, you know, without allowing more development than is already allowed there, providing a little flexibility, well, I guess you could consider 4 stories within that shell, but it's no more massing than is allowed there. To allow flexibility for a building to be an apartment building rather than mixed use is one idea, and the other is to allow for 4 stories without making the building any bigger is another idea.
Why do you think it should have 4 stories?
Why?
Yeah, why do you want to change that?
Well, first of all, if we're allowing a 45-foot building, I don't understand why we would limit it to 3 stories. Generally, I'm of the belief, personally, that I'm not really concerned about, you know, I'm concerned about the massing, but we're allowing a 45-foot building here. So I'm not too concerned about whether it's got an extra story in it. I happen to think more people, more households is good.
We have 4-story building that just got built on Forest Avenue. I mean, looks fine. This is Montgomery Avenue, right? I mean, it's the Royal Bank, it'll be fine.
Like I said, the Royal Bank is 3 stories, one half below grade for the court.
But you said it's about 40 feet tall.
40 feet.
Yeah, so 45 next to 40, I mean, it's not, the Royal Bank stands out now because there aren't that many tall buildings.
But all I'm saying is this one would not be on Montgomery Avenue.
No, I agree, that
Yeah,
718 is a
okay.
totally different topic.
Yeah, it's a different topic.
Because we're gonna have the Price House on Montgomery Avenue, which,
Yeah, I mean, to me, it has nothing to do with being on Montgomery. 45 feet of Montgomery, I really could care less about. It's more, its relation to the residential properties
Yeah,
and
that's what I'm
and the
saying.
historic
Yeah, I mean,
properties.
yeah. No one's
Yeah.
arguing the 45 feet of Montgomery.
And that's, to me, that's all we're really talking about.
I'm just putting things in perspective, that's how big it would be taller than.
So we moved the Price House.
That worries me.
I think it's,
That worries
so as
me.
we look at this, we can say.
Why is it worrying? No, you mean technically that they
We
can't
debated
do it?
this last time.
They can do it.
That's the least of my worries.
We could have an absolute setback from any adjacent residential district.
It's absolutely.
We discussed that last time.
Or
It wasn't
as they're
it was a
suggesting, step it
contentious idea
down.
when we brought it up before. But that's a way to do it. So that would be what we would look at. So if 45 feet feels incompatible with a residential, we could, that could be part of what's here.
There's the Price House back there. Joe's 45 foot.
But the thing is, I just want to underscore, our code currently allows a 45-foot mixed-use building in that location.
Right.
And you simply can't, when someone comes in with a proposal to build one, say, that's too bad, we're going to change the zoning to make it 3 stories and 35 feet, because they don't like it. Because you know what, the code allows it now.
And the one they propose is, which is like 33 or something.
So,
I thought we decided what they proposed wasn't really a mixed-use building.
Right, because they're connecting it to the,
That was, it's a faux connection.
but they're not doing that anymore.
Anyway.
The new
And
plan.
that's a unique there's no other property in 5B that will have that series of issues.
Yeah, probably
down where PNC Bank is and the Norbert Plaza is, there's plenty of space there. Where the next one that's going to go is that place where Blockbuster used to be, where it's now like an audiovisual.
No, but I mean in terms of the historic house, the historic property that's on the
I don't know
site.
how old those buildings are.
Okay,
So what's the question?
somehow I think we're watching this
question
on
is-
1.5 didn't see the Blockbuster, but I could be wrong.
What I'm trying to do is gauge interest in kind of creating an overlay that allows for apartment buildings in the 5B district, and for the 45-foot buildings, we already allow to have 4 stories instead of 3, in situations where a historic resource is being preserved. So basically what we're allowing people to do they can't do now is have an apartment building instead of a mixed-use building. And we're allowing them to have 4 floors of occupiable space instead of 3. That's what this would propose. It sounds like, there's interest in thinking about the relationship of that to the resource, to the historic, to the nearby neighborhoods, which is great feedback. I'm also suggesting that we need to do we do not have parking design standards for underground parking. Primarily, how they're accessed.
Well, I mean, do we need them? What, I don't understand, because
Underground parking could be proposed before we know it.
well, no, but there's underground parking under the Methodist church. I mean, they just
Yeah, but
did
that
it.
was built within the shell of the building, so.
But I mean, what standards do you, what do you
Yeah,
mean by
what are you looking
standards?
for?
In the cases where we've allowed it, it doesn't work.
Well,
In either case, it doesn't work.
these standards for parking, so basically to look at the parking, you have to use the rules for surface parking. Right.
Either say.
The rules for surface parking discuss the distance from which parking needs to be set back from adjacent properties. And it discusses sides of a property from which parking can be accessed. Right now, we allow parking spaces at grade underneath the building. It may be the same rules we already have, but we don't explicitly have code language that allows us to evaluate them. For example, right now, you know, surface parking has to be set aside further from
Third lot
adjacent-
layer or whatever, right?
Yeah, but you may say, you know what, underground parking, that's okay, it can be in the first lot layer if it's underground parking. Or the second lot layer, you know what I mean? Or it doesn't have to be 45, you know, we have, so you might, because it's underground, you might want to, and this might, maybe even go property, this would, you know, so, I think we don't have it, and I think we might, you know, certainly for 714 Montgomery, we asked them to consider underground parking, right? But we don't have standards for underground parking in our code. So I think it would be good to look at whether or not we need to have them. So that's the third part of this.
So I have for the notes, the changes to the 5B zoning district, allow apartment buildings when preserving a historic building. Buildings may be 4 stories tall when preserving an historic building. And parking design standards for underground parking should be created, for example, for setbacks and access requirements.
What I'm asking is, would you be agreeable to exploring a proposal for zoning changes of this sort?
Yeah, Heidi said 45 feet is too tall, but near residential areas.
I think the feedback we're getting is there's concern about the 45-foot buildings in the 5B zone, particularly in relation to adjacent residential neighborhoods.
That's correct.
And historic resources.
Yeah, yeah.
There's concern.
All right. Is there concern just about apartment buildings as opposed to mixed use?
I'm not concerned about the apartment buildings as a trade-off personally. But I guess I'm curious about where this is all going, and I keep waiting for the opportunity to be like, I think we need a plan for Montgomery Avenue that's more like an urban design plan, and also for Wynwood. It has to be in collaboration with Lower Marion because they have half the street, and that should be the objective, and then the zoning can be adjusted as necessary in response to that plan. That's kind of what I think we need to do next. But that's not the question before us.
We're waiting for our borough council and for Chris Lessman to make that a priority.
Well, I want to maybe follow up with you on that.
And underground parking is a great idea. For one thing, it does reduce heat island effect, which...
Yeah, but I hadn't thought about this whole, if surface parking is explicitly not allowed in certain locations, does the code block underground parking in that same location or not, right? Because
it's not clear.
Right.
And I prefer to have things be clear in the code, and not just to be a loosey-goosey interpreted situation.
Yeah.
All
Lower
right, so-
Marion does offer a density increase for underground parking in certain zoning districts to tie all of your values together, which is interesting to
I don't
know.
think we're talking about that.
I know, I'm just
Goodness. Well, at
they
least
try to encourage it. but they
underground
don't.
parking is definitely not something that's going to go away in practice. All right, so I will report out to council about this, but express, that there are that there are concerns about how these buildings would relate resources into adjacent neighborhoods in terms of first-story buildings. All right, I'm sorry to keep you all so late, but these are things council wants to hear from us on. All right, is there anything else? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
There's a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night.